Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
she could have said stump.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
It went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 3 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. A third child, a girl aged just 9, has died after the Southport knife attack yesterday. Live pictures on your screen there now of locals laying down flowers in tribute. 2 other girls, aged 6 and 7, have also died and 5 remain critically injured. The big questions are, what happens next and when will the attacker be identified? We'll have the latest live from Southport throughout the show. Next up, hate preacher Anjem Choudary has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 28 years. Choudary once bragged he was the #1 radicaliser in Britain. We'll have the full story on the long road to jailing one of the UK's most notorious and divisive Islamists. And millions of pensioners are furious today after Rachel Reeves axed the winter fuel allowance for all but the poorest of pensioners. Is it fair to punish those who've paid in for a lifetime, or a tough but necessary choice? Will pensioners freeze thanks to Rachel Reeves? That's all coming up in your next hour. Welcome to the show. Always a pleasure to have your company. Well, the scenes from Southport continue to pour in. Heartbreaking scenes now as young girls are named. Alice, a 9-year-old, named this afternoon. The photographs so poignant. The flowers are so poignant. But now we need to start asking difficult questions. How did this happen? How can we ever allow anything like this to happen on British soil? How can we stop it? What needs to be done? All big questions. I want to know what you think about this. We haven't been able to name the attacker. Due process must be followed. Speculation has been rife. Not all of it's helpful. But people are desperate for answers, and into vacuums go untruths. Let me know your thoughts. Go to gbnews.com/your say. Now it's your headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 3. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The third child to die after yesterday's knife attack in Southport has been named as 9-year-old Alice Aguiar. 5 other children and 2 adults remain in a critical condition after what was described as a ferocious attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance and yoga workshop. The pop star has also paid tribute, saying she's in shock at the loss of life and horrendous trauma, adding that they were just little kids. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper laid flowers at the scene this morning and says the government is on a moral mission to address knife crime across the country.
Our thoughts will be with the families who have been affected, the loved ones who have been lost and the children who are injured. I've been meeting with some of the first responders, the emergency services, the police, fire service and paramedics who were there yesterday and who had to respond with great bravery to make sure that more lives were not lost, and I thank them for the work that they did. There is also a serious criminal investigation underway now, but everyone's thoughts will be with those injured children and just praying for them.
Notorious hate preacher Anjem Choudary has been handed a life sentence after he was convicted of directing a banned terrorist organisation. The 59-year-old was found guilty of running the terror group in a caretaker role after its founder was jailed in Lebanon in 2014. Today's sentencing comes after Choudary managed to evade authorities for decades, despite being jailed in 2016. He'll now spend at least 28 years in prison. Carol Hunt, who was the wife of BBC commentator John Hunt, died from stab wounds. That's according to Hertfordshire Police. The investigation into the triple murder found that two of their daughters, Hannah and Louise, died from crossbow bolt injuries. Police are still waiting to speak to a suspect who's in hospital with self-inflicted injuries. Victims of the post office scandal can now apply for compensation of £600,000 or more through a new scheme. Ministers say the scheme aims to right the wrong of one of Britain's worst miscarriages of justice. Exonerated sub-postmasters will still be receiving confirmation letters this week, though some may need to submit further evidence. However, critics are frustrated with the slow pace, claiming only 10 letters have been sent out so far. GB News can reveal that more than 3,000 small boat migrants have crossed the English Channel since Labour came into power. The figure was reached this morning as around 400 migrants were detected in British waters since yesterday morning. The number of migrants crossing the Channel so far this year is almost 17,000. In other news, the Deputy Prime Minister has unveiled an overhaul of the planning system, which she says paves the way for 1.5 million new homes. It will see mandatory housing targets restored and some low-quality greenbelt land freed up for construction. The plans also include measures to counter a decline in social and affordable housing, with relaxed rules for councils, which the government says makes it easier to build more houses. 2 Just Stop Oil protesters were arrested at Heathrow Airport this morning after splattering a terminal with orange paint. Parts of Terminal 5 were targeted as part of the activist group campaign against summer travel, which they've dubbed Oil Kills. They were arrested on suspicion of criminal damage. The airport says it's continuing to operate as normal. And today could be the hottest day of the year so far, with temperatures in some areas expected to soar beyond 32 degrees. Forecasters expect the heat to peak in southern England and Wales later today, but you're best to make the most of it as thunderstorms are predicted to break the hot spell later in the week. And if you've ever dreamed of hosting the Oscars, now might be your chance after 2 big names turned down the role. The talk show host Jimmy Kimmel and comedian John Mulaney have both been asked, but it seems it's a job nobody wants, with both stars turning down the plum position. Hosting the Academy Awards is widely seen as a prestigious platform, but it often attracts harsh criticism. Producers are now resuming their search for a new face ahead of next year's 97th awards. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, the 9-year-old girl killed in yesterday's knife attack in Southport has been named. Alice Arguiar is the 3rd child to die after sustained injuries from the dance class stabbings. Merseyside police have just confirmed another 5 children and 2 adults remain in a critical condition. Well, GB News' North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper is at the scene. Sophie, welcome to the show. The entire nation still in a state of absolute shock. The community itself must be stunned, and as we see so often with these cases, Sophie, now's when the human side comes out, when the children are named, when the flowers are laid, and the true pain really begins to come out. Tell us about the mood on the ground there in Southport.
Well, there's a real sense of grief here in Southport this morning. The community, of course, rocked by the incident here yesterday. But as you say, it's one of those times that brings a community together. There's been a steady stream of people here today laying flowers and laying messages of sympathy for the families who've been affected by such a tragedy. And of course, this is a tight-knit community. It's a seaside town. So to talk a little bit about that, I'm joined now by my guest, Patrick Chaloup, who is the editor of the Southport Reporter, a local newspaper. Patrick, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. This is the most horrific attack that I think anyone could possibly imagine. What have you made of the community's response so far?
Deep shock. Utter disbelief. Not much you can actually say about it. There's no words that would describe, I think, the emotion of the local community. The community has pulled itself together and is trying to support itself, but it's complete shock.
You can see behind you that there are hundreds of bunches of flowers now elsewhere down the road at the other end of the cordon. It's a similar situation. You say the community has come together, and as it does in Merseyside, we've seen it so many times before. How does a community, how do they get over this? How do they, get through this grief?
I don't think a community ever gets over the grief, but you just start to live with it and cope with it. There are a lot of, if anybody is struggling, there's a lot of people you can talk to, like Samaritans and people like that, and also talk to your local relatives and your people next door to you. Be open about it. I think that's the best way of dealing with it, and Merseyside is good at being open about things and not bottling it up.
Now, Southport is obviously a seaside town that I think a lot of people in the northwest, but the rest of the UK, will have really fond memories of. I know I certainly do. This just isn't something that happens in Southport, is it?
I've never known anything like it, and
How long have you worked, at the Southport Reporter, just so our viewers know?
About 20 years. 20 years. And we've never had anything like this. I've lived in the area all my life, and we've never had anything like this. It's just horrific.
I think a lot of people will be left reeling by the sheer scale of it. I mean, there are 3 families in Southport today grieving the loss of their child, 3 dead now, but there are also others that are critically wounded, those 2 adults as well who are injured, trying to protect the children. I think a lot of people will be shocked at how many there are, and it seems to be a bit of an epidemic now, doesn't it? Knife crime, not just in the northwest but in the entire UK. What can we do to try and tackle this issue?
That's the million-dollar question. Knife crime is getting worse and worse and worse, but it's like all crime. Everything's on the increase. I think it's just we need better understanding of the causes of the crime to deal with it. We need to know what's going on behind the scenes, what is causing people to go that way. There's so much tension, there's so much stress in society. That could be part of it. I don't know. I'm not an expert. You'd have to ask somebody who is. And to be 100% honest, I don't think anybody is an expert on this side. There's not going to be an easy fix.
Well, of course, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, was here earlier today. She laid flowers alongside Serena Kennedy and the MP for Southport as well. Is there anything you think any of those bodies could do, the government, the police, MPs in general, is there anything they can do?
It needs looking at, but at the moment I think the best bet is to actually look after each other and care for each other and try to get over the shock as to what's happened at the moment and then work from that.
I just want to ask you one final question, Patrick. This, of course, is a truly heartbreaking time for those families. If you had a message for any of those families today who are grieving, of course we're seeing, as we have all day, people now coming to lay flowers. If you had a message for those families, what would that message be?
The whole community is thinking about you. We are heartbroken. There's no words in our vocabulary that can actually get across the grief the community is feeling, and I'd not like to think about what those families are going through.
Patrick, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Well, there we are, Martin. I think that's a phrase that we've heard time and time again today, that there are no words, because who could possibly express how this community will be feeling, how those families will be feeling, either at the loss of a child or having a child in a critical condition. Who would have thought this time 2 days ago, 48 hours ago, those families would have been preparing to take their children to a Taylor Swift dance and yoga class where they should have been safe, they should have been able to have fun at the start of their summer holidays, and instead 48 hours later we're facing a situation like this. So much grief, so much heartbreak. This community truly is devastated by this horrific attack.
Thank you, Sophie Reaper, and also thank you there to Patrick. And I think it's the images that it just strikes that every parent watching this, that could be your child. I certainly got home last night, gave my little girl a bit of a squeeze. No, she's a Taylor Swift fan. This is just ordinary, beautiful children going about their everyday business on a summer camp. Look at that picture there. Her parents said, "Fly high, our little star," to Alice. They called her their princess, and they called her killer a despicable human being. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Patrick. Let's move on now and cross live to GB News reporter Will Hollis, who is at Alderhay Children's Hospital in Liverpool. Will, welcome to the show. So now confirmed 3 children dead, girls aged 9, 6 and 7. 5 still remain critical. What more do we know?
Yes, well, Alderhay specifically treats children, and we know that this is a very busy hospital, even busier yesterday when that major incident was declared. Where we are is about 40 minutes drive from Southport, south into the Liverpool city, but we know that it wasn't just a substantial response from North West Ambulance Service to what happened yesterday. It was also a number of helicopters, medical helicopters, that were used to bring some of those children, as well as to Alderhay, to other hospitals in the Liverpool and Manchester region, this part of the north of England. Now, we know that it was a substantial response from the ambulance service, but we've heard recently from, in a statement, the Great North Air Ambulance Service, who said that what happened yesterday was particularly difficult, and they're used to responding to all sorts of terrible things, the worst injuries that you can imagine, but they've described it as particularly difficult. And we know from what we heard yesterday in that press conference with the police, Merseyside Police Chief Serena Kennedy, she said that when the man armed with a knife went in and started to attack people, it wasn't just adults but many children as well that were hurt, and there are still at least 5 children that are in a critical condition, as well as 2 adults that were described as bravely fighting off the attacker. Now, we haven't had a confirmation from the trust that runs Alderhay whether any of those 5 critical children are being treated in this hospital specifically because of the protections around identity, and as this story progresses, it's just the way that it has to go, keeping the information as sealed as tightly as possible. But we are waiting for a confirmation in the statement from the trust that runs Alderhay as to exactly what is happening and what the condition of those remaining children is right now. We've heard from the Home Secretary, who visited Hart Street where this horrific attack happened, who today said that it is unimaginable what has happened. And we know from what Sophie Reaper, our North West reporter, was just interviewing about, that the community is reeling, the community is in pain. There is such a big response of heartfelt condolences from the community there and the wider public, as well as the most senior people in Britain, the Prime Minister, the King, as well as Taylor Swift, whose music was inspiring that dance party. But here inside of this hospital and other hospitals, we know that there is still a fight for life with people in critical conditions after that knife attack, where a 17-year-old man has been arrested by Merseyside police on suspicion of murder and attempted murder, and they are still trying to figure out what the motive is as they question that person. But they say, and they were very clear about this pretty much from the start, that they do not think that this is terror related.
Will Hollis, and we've got some breaking news here. Just then, the 3 girls killed in that stabbing in Southport have just been named by Merseyside police as 6-year-old BB King, 7-year-old Elsie Dot Stankham, and Alice Argyar, aged 9. So those 3 killed children have just been named by Merseyside police. To repeat their names: 6-year-old BB King, 7-year-old Elsie Dot Stankham, and 9-year-old Alice Argyar. The words no parent wants to ever hear. Thank you, Will Hollis. Oh, God. Right, coming up, we'll get all the latest as Islamist hate preacher Anjem Choudary has been jailed for life for directing a terrorist organisation. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Stefan Kyriazis has, as always, been in theatres. He's here to tell us of his experiences. Hello, Stefan, or should I say, hello, Dolly.
Well, hello, Michael.
Well, hello.
You're looking swell, Michael. I can tell, Michael. You're still glowing, you're crowing, and you're going strong. So I have been to see Hello, Dolly at the Palladium. It's on there until September.
Seems like you've enjoyed it.
It is absolutely pure joy. I think we've even got a little bit of footage just to get people in the mood of the curtain call. But it is just sublime joy, headlined by Imelda Staunton. Let's see if we've got a little clip for everybody to look at.
It was a great show, was it?
It's
a feel-good show?
Absolute bliss. So 1964 musical, music and lyrics by Jerry Herman. 1969 famous Barbra Streisand film. But it's been played by Carol Channing, Ethel Merman, Bette Midler, all these people, Danny LaRue. So the joy of this show, it's so traditional, but you have an old woman leading the show, and then Irene Malloy, who's another slightly younger widow in New York, the hat maker. Orchestration's gorgeous, masked voice is gorgeous. Big train, kind of cut-out train, fills the stage. They all climb on board. It builds towards the end. You get the big Hello, Dolly number, and the whole she did there. Wow, 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 fellas. Look at the old girl now. Staunton is 68, I think. She's 5 foot nothing. The audience kept applauding through the show. She stood there. There was a moment. We all felt such joy.
The People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back. It's 3:22. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, just a reminder of the news just in. The 3 girls killed in the stabbing in Southport have been named by Merseyside police And they are 6-year-old BB King, 7-year-old Elsie Stankham, and 9-year-old Alice Argyar. Just to repeat those names, the 3 girls killed in Southport yesterday have been named by Merseyside Police. And that 6-year-old BB King, 7-year-old Elsie Stankham, and 9-year-old Alice Argyar. Rest in peace. And moving on, an Islamist cleric who directed a banned terrorist organisation from his London home has been jailed for life. Anjem Choudary has previously been found guilty of 3 terror charges earlier this month. He was convicted after a lengthy undercover investigation by US and Canadian authorities. Charlie Peters reports on the background to the case.
Stand back, sir! Stand back! Stand back! You get hurt!
A shameless and prolific radicaliser, finally silenced. For decades, putting a stop to Anjem Choudary has been a key objective for British counter-terrorism authorities.
I am arresting you under Section 41 of the...
Now convicted of 3 terror charges, Choudary is finally behind bars and unable to warp new minds across the world.
It's not only being a member of a terrorism organisation, guilty. It's not only encouraging a terrorist organisation, guilty, but also it's Section 56 of the Terrorism Act, directing a terrorist organisation, guilty on that count also.
USA, you obey! USA, you obey!
Choudary was found to be the director of terror group Al-Muhajirun after American and Canadian undercover officers recorded him giving lectures to a US-based group called the Islamic Thinkers Society. His so-called personal assistant, a Canadian called Khalid Hussein, told an undercover officer that the Islamic Thinkers Society was the US branch of Al-Muhajirun.
Most people don't know I'm part of Al-Muhajirun or who the Islamic Thinkers Society are anyway, so that's why I don't usually care.
Choudary had radicalised several terrorists, including the ISIS-supporting knife men who launched 2 separate attacks on London Bridge in 2017 and 2019. He also inspired the killers of Fusilier Lee Rigby, a soldier murdered outside his barracks. But Britain's most notorious Islamist now faces many years behind bars. Charlie Peters, GB News.
And let's cross to our national reporter, Charlie Peters, now, who's outside Woolwich Crown Court. Charlie, welcome to the show. A long road to justice for Anjem Choudary, 28 years inside, but it took a long time to get him there. Tell us about the extraordinary police investigation to finally help Britain's most poisonous Islamists see justice.
Well, Martin, this is Anjem Chowdary's second terrorism conviction. He was previously behind bars from 2016 to 2018, and then his licence conditions expired in 2021 after he was convicted of encouraging support for the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And it's after those conditions expired that Canadian and American investigators noticed that Anjem Choudary was giving online lectures to a group in the US called the Islamic Thinkers Society. Undercover officers infiltrated this group based in New York City and found that Anjem Choudary was saying extremist and Islamist remarks inside those lectures. He made up to about 30 over the course of those lectures in 2022 and 2023. And it was the evidence of his personal assistant, Khalid Hussein, that was so crucial to this investigation, because he admitted in several voice notes and messages to those undercover officers that the Islamic Thinkers Society in the US and Al-Muhajirun, predominantly in London, were one and the same. The two groups were closely linked. In fact, in one voice note, Khalid Hussein said that the Islamic Thinkers Society was the American branch of Al-Muhajirun, a group that's been proscribed since 2010. It was founded in the late 90s by Omar Bakri Mohammed, the ideological and spiritual leader for so much of the Islamist surge that happened in Britain in the early part of the noughties. But when he left the country in 2005, he continued to maintain control of the organisation until he was imprisoned in the Lebanon in 2014. It was at that point that prosecutors said that Anjem Choudary took on a caretaker role of the organisation. And they found significant evidence to support that view, including in one lecture where Anjem Choudary said that the establishment of ISIS was the most significant event in his life. So many members of al-Muhajiroon and those associated with the proscribed organisation had travelled to Iraq and Syria to fight for ISIS. Many of them had died doing so, and Anjem Choudary had described them as martyrs. But it wasn't just those who fought overseas for Islam, it was also those who had committed Islamist atrocities in Britain. Both the 2017 and 2019 London Bridge murderers and terrorists were closely linked with Anjem Choudary. And also a 5-minute drive away from here in Woolwich Crown Court is the site where Fusilier Lee Rigby was murdered in May 2013. Anjem Choudary had also inspired and radicalised one of his killers, Michael Adebolajo. In the trial, we heard that Anjem Choudary actually officiated at Adebolajo's wedding. Further information came out in the trial also demonstrating the chilling and abhorrent views described by the judge, which has seen him receive a life sentence. He denied the Holocaust. He joked about 9/11, saying that Omar Bakri Mohammed had once charged the press £9.11 to enter an event. And he'd also made several dangerous Islamist remarks encouraging those to fight for Islam. But now, after receiving that life sentence with a minimum term of 28 years, he will be 85 years old until he's liable for parole. So while the establishment of ISIS might have been the most significant event of his life, for the rest of his life, he will be behind bars.
Charlie Peters, Anjem Choudary once bragged he was the #1 radicaliser in Britain, calling that a badge of honour. How can we ensure that that won't continue inside prison? This guy could potentially go in there and spread his toxic Islamist poison from within our prison system. Charlie Peters, there'll be a lot of questions asked over the containment of Anjem Choudary. Maybe in many respects, the difficult work is just beginning.
That's right, Martin. In fact, during the trial, we heard here at Woolwich Crown Court how Anjem Choudary had boasted, as you say, of being the top radicaliser, but also he'd held that as a medallion of honour because when he was most recently in prison between 2016 to 2018, he was kept in a separate area so he could not, in his words, do his dawah, which is the spreading of his Islamist perspective. Well, they will need to make sure that the same procedures are in place for this now life sentence in whichever prison he's held in. Previous investigations into some of those category of prisons that he might be kept in have found some failures in how they're orchestrated. In fact, a brother of the Manchester Arena bomber held in HMP Frankland in the northeast of England was once captured on TV news cameras associating with a Taliban fighter, which is not how things are meant to be organised inside those counter-terror wings in Category A prisons. So the prison service will have a significant challenge to ensure that Anjem Choudary, while he's no longer able to warp new minds around the world and no longer free to carry out those lectures that he did for the Islamic Thinkers Society, they need to make sure he can't do the same inside, because while he's got that life sentence, many people could be interacting with him and then later released.
Wise words, well spoken. Charlie Peters, excellent as ever. Joining us there outside Woolwich Crown Court. Thank you very much. There's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock, including millions of pensioners are furious today after Rachel Reeves axed the winter fuel allowance for all but the poorest pensioners. Is it fair to punish those who paid in for a lifetime? Or is it a tough but necessary choice? Will pensioners freeze under Rachel Reeves? But first, it's your latest news headlines with Sophia Wenzel.
Martin, thank you. It's 3:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. The 3 girls who died after yesterday's knife attack in Southport have been named as 6-year-old BB King, Elsie Stankum, who was 7, and 9-year-old Alice Aguirre. 5 other children and 2 adults remain in a critical condition after what was described as a ferocious attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance and yoga workshop. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper paid tribute to those affected and says the government is on a moral mission to address knife crime across the country. A 17-year-old boy remains in custody on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. Notorious hate preacher Anjem Choudary has been handed a life sentence after he was convicted of directing a banned terrorist organisation. The 59-year-old was found guilty of running the terror group in a caretaker role after its founder was jailed in Lebanon in 2014. He'll now spend at least 28 years in prison. Carol Hunt, who was the wife of BBC commentator John Hunt, died from stab wounds. That's according to Hertfordshire Police. The investigation into the triple murder found that two of their daughters, Hannah and Louise, were killed with a crossbow. Police are still waiting to speak to a suspect who's in hospital with self-inflicted injuries. GB News can reveal that more than 3,000 small boat migrants have crossed the English Channel since Labour came into power. The figure was passed as around 400 migrants were detected reaching British waters since yesterday morning. The figure for the year so far is almost 17,000. Today could be the hottest day of the year so far, with temperatures in some areas expected to soar beyond 32 degrees. Forecasters expect the heat to peak in southern England and Wales later today, but you'd better make the most of it as thunderstorms are predicted to break the hot spell later in the week. And finally, some sports news for you, and it's good news for Team GB. Nathan Hales has just won gold for Great Britain in the men's shooting final. And hopes are still high in the pool tonight for the men's swimming 4x200 relay. Good luck, Team GB. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler, more in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick look at the markets this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.2828 and 1.1877 euros. The price of gold is £1,866 and 65 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 8,288 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, if you want to get in touch with us here at GB News, simply go to gbnews.com/your say, and I'll read out the best of your messages a little later in the show. Tributes pouring in to the deceased girls in Southport, and also you're not at all happy about the pension allowance. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello again, welcome to your latest GB News weather update, coming to you from the Met Office. The hot and humid weather across southern parts will continue for a few days still to come, and with that we have the risk of some thunderstorms. Further north it's a fresher feel, but generally we are under the influence of high pressure, which is why there is plenty of fine sunny weather around. A bit of cloud coming and going, but as we go through the end of the day, lots of late sunshine to look forward to for most of us, and for many it is going to be a dry, clear night. In the south, watch out for some isolated thunderstorms that could push their way through as we go through the early hours, and in the south it is going to stay particularly warm overnight, some places holding up in high teens, possibly low 20s. Further north, a fresher night, some places dropping to around 4 or 5 Celsius. So as we start first thing tomorrow morning, there is the risk of some showers across southern parts, but these are going to become more frequent as we go through the day. Otherwise it's a generally bright and sunny story. Some cloud across northern parts of England and perhaps Northern Ireland as well, but across much of Scotland it is also going to be largely fine and sunny here. However, over the Northern Isles there may be a bit of showery rain around, and like I said, a chillier start across parts of Scotland compared to other parts of the UK. Through the day then, and as I mentioned, the showers across southern parts are going to become a bit more of a feature. Watch out for some heavy thunderstorms pushing into parts of the south and southeast, and these could lead to some disruption, which is why we have a warning in force. Elsewhere it's likely to stay mostly dry and bright, and again in the south feeling pretty hot, temperatures getting into the low 30s, markedly fresher than this across northern parts, mid to high teens or low 20s for most places here. More showers to come across the southern parts as we go through the evening on Wednesday, and these could still be heavy and could still be thundery, with more thunderstorms likely across much of England and Wales as we go through Thursday as well. Then something a little bit fresher from the west by the weekend. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. Queues on the M5 in Somerset in both directions. There's a lane closed in each direction for emergency barrier repairs between junction 23 Bridgewater North and 24 Bridgewater South. The motorway was closed in both directions at one stage, so we're still seeing congestion on surrounding routes. Slow for the M27 eastbound in Hampshire due to an earlier vehicle fire at junction 7 Hedge End in the roadworks. And nearby in the roadworks, traffic busy but moving around junction 5 Southampton Airport. And in West Sussex, we're seeing severe delays on the A286 main road southbound near Birdham, near to the Shell station. It's not helped by roadworks, congestion going back to the Stockbridge roundabout, and we're also seeing queuing traffic through Donington and Hunston as traffic heads away and diverts. And that's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. It's 3:38. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. To repeat news earlier, the 3 girls killed in the stabbing in Southport have been named by Merseyside Police in order of the pictures on your screen. 6-year-old BB King on the left, 7-year-old Elsie Stankham in the middle there, and 9-year-old Alice Argyar, just to repeat. They've been named by Merseyside Police. The 3 deceased girls, 6-year-old BB King, 7-year-old Elsie Stankham and 9-year-old Alice Argyar. Well, GB News' North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper is at the scene in Southport. Sophie, welcome back to the show. And inevitably now the 3 little mites have been named, and this adds an extra level of rawness to everybody in the community, everybody around the country, everybody trying to make sense of this. Tell us, what's the mood like on the ground there?
Well, it really does make everything feel so much more real, doesn't it, when we hear those names and we see those little faces of those little girls who have lost their lives, BB, Elsie and Alice. It's just so heartbreaking, and I think the reaction from people here throughout the day as they've heard those names and they've seen those pictures, it just gets progressively worse, doesn't it? And of course, we know that those 3 little girls, they were just attending a Taylor Swift dance class. They were just enjoying themselves. They were left there by their parents to enjoy an activity during their summer holidays, and now their summer holidays are over. They'll never have another summer holidays. There's nothing more devastating than the realisation of that fact, and I think for those families coming to terms with their grief, it's just so horrendous to think about what they're going through. And as I said to you earlier, we're seeing this steady stream of people coming to lay flowers. In the last 20 minutes or so, we've seen a couple come along and lay candles. I'm not sure if you can see over my shoulder. They laid candles, and I spoke to the lady who was there, and she said that's a Polish tradition of commemoration after a loss of life. So the community truly coming together to try and support those families. We've heard statements from a couple of the families as well. BB's family said, "No words can describe the devastation that has hit our family as we try to deal with the loss of our little girl BB." That's the family of the 6-year-old who lost her life yesterday. The family of Alice have also paid tribute to their daughter. They said, "Keep smiling and dancing like you love to do, our princess. Like we said before to you, you're always our princess, and no one would change that. Love from your hero, Daddy and Mummy." Those words, Daddy and Mummy, hearing the words directly from the parents there of one of those little girls, Alice, just 9 years old, lost her life here yesterday in the most tragic and horrendous of circumstances. And I think this is something that's going to rock the community here in Southport and across the UK for quite some time to come.
And Sophie, the 3 poor girls there, they've been named. The heartbreak in the community is also another emotion, and that's the anger at the perpetrator of this heinous crime. And of course, that individual hasn't been named, probably won't be for some time due to the fact he's 17 and afforded anonymity. That's a whole conversation for another time. But a moment of hope, Sophie Reaper, that's come out of this. I've been struck by the milk of human kindness from Taylor Swift fans and the GoFundMe page, because of course this was a Taylor Swift event. Taylor Swift herself has issued a statement, absolutely stunned by what happened at an event where children, the same age as my daughter, were just dancing, as they always do, to music. An astonishing sum of money has been raised globally by a group calling themselves Swifties for Southport. And Sophie, I just want to try and give a bit of hope to people. I think a lot of us at the moment are searching for something positive in this story. At least there's a small, tiny ray of sunlight in this story. Tell us more.
Well, I think if you want some hope, Martin, there's no better than looking right here behind me. This kind of thing has been happening all day. People coming all throughout this day to lay flowers, to lay cuddly toys, to express messages to the family. I can see one, I assume a father with his son approaching us now with a bunch of lilies and a cuddly toy to lay that down. And that is exactly what happens here in Merseyside when tragic events like this happens. I spoke to one gentleman earlier and he said that this is in their blood here in Merseyside, and that's absolutely what has happened today. They have come together. They band together at times like this. They come together as a community. They do what they can. The community also have been supporting the police today. Of course, the police with that rapid response yesterday, and they've been here at the police cordon all day. Many, many officers doing what they can to support the local community. Of course, Merseyside Police, the community throughout the day have been doing what they can to support their local officers. There's been drinks, there's been energy drinks, water, there's been cups of tea offered, there's bacon sandwiches. We saw one group of gentlemen arrive earlier in a van with huge bags of biscuits and chocolate and crisps just to try and sustain the police officers who have given their service today and for the past 48 hours or so, well, 24, 36 hours, 2 days, I would say, to try and support them because this is obviously a very difficult time for everyone, and I think it's truly heartwarming and it brings so much hope that in the darkest of times here in Southport on this residential street where no one would have ever suspected this kind of horrific attack could take place, that those are the immediate reactions of the community to provide whatever support they can in whatever way they can.
And Sophie, just to interrupt now, we have live pictures of Sir Keir Starmer arriving in the area. He was arriving. Sir Keir Starmer is in the area, come to pay tribute. Yvette Cooper, of course, was there earlier. But yes, Sophie Reaper, over £100,000 now raised by that GoFundMe. And no doubt, as Taylor Swift signal boosts that one small crumb of comfort, the money is immaterial in many senses, but at least it shows you that people out there care. People out there, and Sophie, I've had to talk to my kids about flowers around lampposts and what it means. Those scenes behind you there of children being led up by their fathers and their mothers to lay those wreaths. Those kids will somehow have to try and make sense of this, Sophie Reaper. The whole nation is trying to make sense of this. Certainly the community there is trying to make sense of it. Sophie Reaper, thank you for helping us with that. Really appreciate your time. We'll come back to you later throughout the show. OK, we'll have much more on this story coming up. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
You're making me think. You were here last week talking about The Merry Widow at Glyndebourne, which I went to see last night. And it was much the same thing. I mean, musically, it doesn't rate, to me, much higher than a musical. But the professionalism of the delivery, the joy of the cast, therefore the joy of the audience, the absolute charisma of Daniel Denise singing and dancing in the main role, absolutely superb. So just to recollect that.
Yeah, and
by the way, how long does Hello, Dolly?
That's on until September the 14th. And I would say there's been some bumpy, like My Fair Lady, sort of traditional musicals have sort of wobbled quite a bit recently, even The King and I a bit. This one nails everything. I cannot recommend it highly enough. I came out humming and beaming for the rest of the night. Now, the second one is The Baker's Wife, complete opposite. Small show at the Meunier Chocolate Factory, and again we've got bootleg illegal footage of me, I think, just to give, because you need to see the setting of this place. It's completely incredible what they've done in a small space. Hopefully we've got a little bit of my illegal video again. It's set up like a 1930s Provence village square. You can see the cafe there at one end. At the other end is the bread shop, the bakery. The walls are all painted like brick. There's shutters everywhere, posters. People pop out of shutters that you don't even know how they are. We're sat either side. And it's a Stephen Schwartz musical. So he's the guy behind Wicked, Pippin, things like that. But it's still kind of joyous and fun until the marquis of the village, who has 3 nieces, comes along with his manservant who sweeps her away. And then for me, I didn't like how the story turns. I don't think it works anymore in a modern day.
The People's Channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way.
Might be cold in this studio.
That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 3:48. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, around 10 million pensioners are set to lose their winter fuel allowance. And the measure was announced as Chancellor Rachel Reeves accused the Conservatives of leaving a £22 billion black hole in public finances. And now her opposite number, Jeremy Hunt, wants to stop so-called trash talking about the UK economy, blaming Labour for not balancing their books. Well, let's cross now to Adam Cherry, who's on Downing Street for us. Adam, welcome to the show. You and I covered this story yesterday as it broke. And I tell you what, Adam, it's fair to say the viewers of GB News at least are absolutely fuming about this. Let me read out a comment that sums it up from Barbara. Barbara says, I'm absolutely fuming with this Labour government. How dare they treat pensioners like this? Going after pensioners is so wrong on all levels. So, Adam Cherry, yesterday, Rachel Reeves said we have to make some tough decisions. But this decision, it has to be said, has gone down amongst many, many pensioners very, very badly.
Yeah, that's right, Martin, but that's why they're very keen to justify this £22 billion black hole figure. It's very important to their pitch. Without it, you wouldn't expect to see a Labour Chancellor come out with a policy like that. It's not in their instincts. In fact, if you look at the tweets of many of the cabinet members when they were in opposition, they were directly opposed to this sort of policy. So it's very important to the party, to the government, that they lay the blame at the previous administration. As you say, Rachel Reeves, very punchy in her language towards her predecessor, Jeremy Hunt. This morning, even going so far as to call him a liar. And Jeremy Hunt punching back. He wrote a letter last night to the most senior civil servant, the Cabinet Secretary Simon Case, saying there's a discrepancy here with this £22 billion figure, because just last week Parliament was presented with some figures from the departments, from the government departments, signed off by their respective civil servants, showing very different figures. So which one is it? It's a very contentious topic, and as you say, viewers will be expressing their upset about this. Age UK, a leading charity, has come out against it as well. So a very contentious topic that will not, excuse me, that will carry on for the next 3 months, because we have a budget to come along on the 30th of October as well. That's where the pain is going to continue with tax rises as well. So this is not the end you'll hear of this.
Adam Cherry, the choking that you are experiencing there is one echoed by millions of pensioners around the country. Thank you very much for joining us there live from Downing Street. Now, in other news, Great Britain has just added another gold medal to the collection at the Paris Olympics. Nathan Hale secured the Olympic title in the men's shooting track final, and on his debut, no less. The 28-year-old has also set a new Olympic record, scoring 48 out of 50. Wow, available targets in the final. Excellent stuff. Now, for more on this and the rest of the huge Olympic talking points is the sports broadcaster. It's our daily Olympic update with Chris Scudder. Scuds, welcome to the show. More gold for Britain. Fantastic news.
Yeah, Nathan Hales, that was strangely compelling watching that dead-eye accuracy. 28-year-old from Kent. He's the world record holder as well. You know, real tension as well. There were 6 shooters at the start, and they were gradually eliminated one by one. But Hales was absolutely fantastic. Basically, it's clay pigeon shooting. If you remember the old thing where they went full and they shot it, it was like that, coming out at all angles. And he had 50 shots and 48 he hit, which is amazing, really. And that was enough to give him the gold medal. His world record was 49 out of 50, but absolute superstar of shooting. And first time we've won this event in the trap since 1968. Although you remember, I was thinking Olympics, you kind of remember the shooters who win gold medals. There was a guy called Peter Wilson in 2012 in London who won the gold in the double trap, I think. So well done, fantastic effort. And that's 3 golds now for the Brits, and we're counting.
And Scuds, the shooter there, very much a young athlete on his ascension curve today. Of course, Andy Murray might be bowing out. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, it's an incredible escape, wasn't it, in the first round of the men's doubles with Dan Evans. He's back today, and if they can win this match against the Belgians of Vigil and Vliegen, that should be on in a little while. It's really, really warm in Paris. I hope that's not going to affect things too much, but you can see what it meant to them. Murray, he's had some great escapes in the past, but I think he's really enjoying his last outing as a tennis player. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if he won a medal? He's already won 3 Olympic medals. But he's playing that game against the Belgians. And, you know, just a little omen. Remember Murray, he's very patriotic. He won the Davis Cup pretty much single-handedly for the Brits. First time in nearly 80 years back in 2015. And the final was against Belgium. So maybe that's an omen. But that's to come a little bit later on.
Thank you very much. All eyes on Andy Murray later on. Chris Scudder will join you later on in the show for another Parisian Olympic update. Thank you. Now, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has gone to Southport to pay his respects to the victims of yesterday's stabbing attack. He spoke to reporters while he was there.
I came here to pay my respects to the victims and families who are going through raw pain and grief that most of us can't imagine. I can't imagine as a dad myself. To get a briefing from the Chief Constable and the emergency services about the ongoing investigation, but also importantly to have the opportunity to say to those that were responding yesterday from the emergency services, to say a personal thank you to them and to shake their hand, and to say that as Prime Minister on behalf of the country we are grateful for what they did. They of course say that they will respond, they're professionals, to anything, but there's no pretending that what they had to respond to yesterday was ordinary. It was very, very difficult of them. They were absolutely professional, and it was important for me to come and say simple words, thank you.
You touched on it before, but as a father, does the nature of this incident touch a particular nerve with you personally and with the rest of the country?
I think it touches a nerve with the whole country. It's awful to contemplate what happened, to hear for myself the experiences of the first responders, what they had to deal with. It's really hard to take in for anybody. It's not what any of them came to work for, but of course they're professionals and they deal with it. I think about the families, the friends, the loved ones, those directly impacted, and of course the wider community here. But there's no pretending, I think, that anybody in the country is not untouched by what happened yesterday.
You've talked about tackling knife crime a moral mission for your government. Is anything going to change? Is anything going to happen as a result of what happened yesterday?
I am very worried about high levels of knife crime, and I'm absolutely determined that my government will get to grips with it. But today is not the time for politics. Today is the time to focus entirely on the families who are going through such pain and grief, and on the wider community, and of course a time to say thank you to those that responded yesterday in the most awful of circumstances.
That's a Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer paying respects in Southport. And of course, playing more live from Southport in just a moment, a community trying to make sense of yesterday. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. Queues on the M60 clockwise in Manchester. It's all due to a vehicle fire at Junction 3 Kingsway. The M42 southbound in Warwickshire is blocked for an accident and an oil spillage. It's between Junction 7, the intersection with the M6, and Junction 6 Birmingham Airport. Queues going back towards Junction 9 Curdworth. Queues on the M1 northbound in Buckinghamshire. 2 lanes closed there for an overturned vehicle between Junction 14 Milton Keynes and 15 for Northampton. Queues on the M1 southbound in Hertfordshire. There's a lane closed for a vehicle fire between Junction 8 Hemel Hempstead and 6A for the M25. We're also seeing slow traffic on the northbound stretch, possibly due to onlookers. And there's queues on the M4 in Carmarthenshire in both directions in the roadworks between Junction 48 Hendy and the Pont Abraham roundabout. And that's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
You really could become the next big Great British Giveaway winner with your chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash to spend on anything you like. Listen to what some of our previous winners have to say about winning big with us.
On the day that I got the money in the bank account, everything just seemed a lot sunnier.
But I do have something to spend it on.
Just go for it. It's an absolute must.
Thank you, GBNews.
Amazing feeling to win.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
she could have said stump.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. On today's show, the 3 young girls killed in the stabbings in Southport have been named by Merseyside Police. 6-year-old BB King, 7-year-old Elsie Stankham and 9-year-old Alice Argyar. As tributes pour in, we'll bring you the latest from the scene on the ground. And hate preacher Anjem Choudary has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 28 years. Choudary once bragged he was the #1 radicaliser in Britain. We'll have the full story on the long road to jailing one of the UK's most notorious and divisive Islamists. And today, the Labour government closes the historic European Scrutiny Committee, a decades-old committee that kept a beady eye on Brussels laws and how they impacted the UK. I'll be joined by Sibylle Cash, the ESC's chairman, who put in over 40 years' service to make sure that the European Union kept its nose out of British business. And that's all coming up in your next hour. Well, to the show, thanks for your company. The nation's still in a state of shock after those killings yesterday in Southport. Yvette Cooper went earlier. Sir Keir Starmer is in the area saying we think we need to change. We need to get to the bottom of this. We've had hundreds of messages in today trying to make sense of what's going on in Britain. Rampant knife crime, out of control streets, and now terror striking into the heart of a school group, a holiday camp that millions of parents across Britain will empathise with because our children have been in them, dancing, having fun. Suddenly, a community gripped by tragedy. The 3 children have been named, but so far, of course, their attacker has not. That's a question we need to talk about later in the show. We'll certainly have that conversation. Let your thoughts come through the usual way, gbnews.com/your say. But now it's time for your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon to you. Well, as you've been hearing, police have named the 3 little girls who died after yesterday's knife attack in Southport. They are 6-year-old Bibi King, Elsie Stancombe, who was 7, and 9-year-old Alice Aguiar. 5 other children and 2 adults remain in a critical condition in hospital after what was described by police as a ferocious attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance and yoga workshop for children. The pop star herself has also paid tribute, saying she's in shock at the loss of life and horrendous trauma, adding that they were just little kids. Well, the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary have both laid flowers at the scene in Southport. Yvette Cooper says the government is on a moral mission now to address knife crime right across the country.
Our thoughts will be with the families who have been affected, the loved ones who have been lost and the children who are injured. I've been meeting with some of the first responders, the emergency services, the police, fire service and paramedics who were there yesterday and who had to respond with great bravery to make sure that more lives were not lost, and I thank them for the work that they did. There is also a serious criminal investigation underway now, but everyone's thoughts will be with those injured children and just praying for them.
Yvette Cooper speaking earlier on today. Now, in other news today, the notorious hate preacher Anjem Choudary has been handed a life sentence after he was convicted of directing a banned terrorist organisation. The 59-year-old was found guilty of running the terror group in a caretaker role after its founder was jailed in Lebanon in 2014. Today's sentencing comes after Choudary managed to evade the authorities for decades, despite being jailed in 2016. He'll now spend at least 28 years in prison and won't be eligible for parole until he's 85 years old. One of the daughters of BBC commentator John Hunt sent a text message asking for help during a crossbow attack, saying that she'd been tied up. An inquest heard that Hannah Hunt, who was 28, managed to dial 999. Emergency responders found her still alive with a crossbow wound, but she later died from her injuries. Her sister Louise was also killed by the crossbow, while their mother died of stab wounds. Police are still waiting to speak to a suspect who's in hospital with self-inflicted injuries. A 73-year-old woman has been arrested after a suspected noxious substance was released on a busy shopping street in Bath in Somerset. Shoppers on Stall Street started to feel ill, with 2 people taken to hospital for breathing difficulties after a woman approached them with a bag in the city. Witnesses also reported seeing people being treated at the scene, including a woman being hosed down and taken to an ambulance. Avon and Somerset police are investigating and are asking anyone with any information to come forward. Victims of the post office scandal can now apply for compensation of £600,000 or more through a new scheme. Ministers say it aims to right the wrongs of one of Britain's worst miscarriages of justice. Those who've been cleared will start receiving their letters this week, though some may need to submit further evidence. But critics say they're frustrated with the slow pace of the system, claiming only 10 letters have been sent out so far. A serial shoplifter who committed near Olympian-scale fraud totalling £500,000 worth of items has been jailed for 10 years. Lorinda Kaur travelled all over the country to carry out what the judge described as a tsunami of dishonesty against top high street retailers. Gloucester Crown Court heard the 54-year-old stole from the likes of Boots, Debenhams, John Lewis and TK Maxx more than 1,000 times. 2 Just Stop Oil protesters were arrested at Heathrow Airport this morning after splattering a terminal with orange paint. Parts of Terminal 5 were targeted as part of the activist group's campaign against summer travel, which they've dubbed as Oil Kills. They were arrested on suspicion of criminal damage. The airport says it's continuing to operate as usual. And as if you hadn't noticed, today could be the hottest day of the year so far, with temperatures in some areas expected to soar beyond 32 degrees. Forecasters expect the heat to peak in southern England and Wales later on today, but you'd be best making the most of it. Thunderstorms are predicted to break the hot spell later this week. Now, if you've ever dreamt of hosting the Oscars, as if you would, now might be your chance after two big names have turned the offer down. The talk show host Jimmy Kimmel and the comedian John Mulaney have both been asked, but it seems it's a job nobody wants, with both stars turning down the plum position. Hosting the Academy Awards is widely seen as a prestigious platform, but it often attracts harsh criticism. Producers are now resuming their search for a new face ahead of next year's 97th awards. Ask Ricky Gervais, perhaps? Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm back in half an hour with more.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to news alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has gone to Southport to pay his respects to the victims of yesterday's stabbing attack. He spoke to reporters while he was there.
I came here to pay my respects to the victims and families who are going through raw pain and grief that most of us can't imagine. I can't imagine as a dad myself. To get a briefing from the Chief Constable and the emergency services about the ongoing investigation, but also importantly, to have the opportunity to say to those that were responding yesterday from the emergency services, to say a personal thank you to them and to shake their hand and to say that as Prime Minister, on behalf of the country, we are grateful for what they did. They, of course, say that they will respond, they're professionals, to anything, but there's no pretending that what they had to respond to yesterday was ordinary. It was very, very difficult of them. They were absolutely professional, and it was important for me to come and say simple words, thank you.
You touched on it before, but as a father, does the nature of this incident touch a particular nerve with you personally and with the rest of the country?
I think it touches a nerve with the whole country. It's awful to contemplate what happened, to hear for myself the experiences of the first responders, what they had to deal with. It's really hard to take in for anybody. It's not what any of them came to work for, but of course they're professionals and they deal with it. I think about the families, the friends, the loved ones, those directly impacted, and of course the wider community here. But there's no pretending, I think, that anybody in the country is not untouched by what happened yesterday.
You've talked about tackling knife crime a moral mission for your government. Is anything going to change? Is anything going to happen as a result of what happened yesterday?
I am very worried about high levels of knife crime, and I'm absolutely determined that my government will get to grips with it. But today is not the time for politics. Today is the time to focus entirely on the families who are going through such pain and grief, and on the wider community, and of course a time to say thank you to those that responded yesterday in the most awful of circumstances.
That's Sir Keir Starmer in Southport, and no doubt a huge challenge lies ahead for the Prime Minister. And the three girls killed in the stabbing in Southport yesterday have now been named by Merseyside Police in order of the pictures you can see now on your screen. On the left, we have 6-year-old BB King. 7-year-old Elsie Dot Stankham there is in the centre. And on the right, we have 9-year-old Alice Argyll. Rest in peace. GB News' North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper is at the scene. Sophie, welcome back to the show. The whole nation trying to make sense of the senseless. We're so used to knife crime now, Sophie, it's almost become something we're immune to. And yet, when children are struck like this, it's different. Seeing the pictures, hearing the names, making it so raw and real. And Sophie, the parents' tributes, the messages they are reading out, beautiful and yet very, very difficult to listen to their messages. Tell us about the mood on the ground.
Absolutely, Martin. I think it's just a heartbroken mood here on the ground. Members of the community coming together to do what they can to offer that support to those families who are grieving. We just heard the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, there saying it's touched a nerve with the whole country. In the last 15 minutes or so, we've seen him at this police cordon laying flowers at the same place where the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, laid some earlier on today. And in the last few moments, I've just received word that on the flowers that he laid, there was a handwritten note signed by Sir Keir Starmer, which read, "To the victims, families and people of Southport, our hearts are broken. There are no words for such profound loss. The nation's thoughts are with you." Now, of course, earlier today, he also met with firefighters and ambulance staff who were some of the first on the scene here on Hart Street yesterday when that attack took place. He was thanking them for their service, telling them he was proud of them. He said, "I really want you to focus on the facts. There are children alive today because of what you did yesterday. That is incredible." And it really is incredible. There's been such an outpouring of support for the families of those children who have been affected in this attack, either those 3 young girls who lost their lives or those who still remain in hospital after being stabbed. But there's also been such an outpouring of support for the emergency services here in the Merseyside region and the wider Northwest. Of course, the Northwest Ambulance Service responding yesterday, 13 ambulances as well as several other services responding. The police here on the cordon have been so well supported by the community today, bringing them cups of tea and coffee and offering them whatever they may need to help them as they protect this cordon around the area where the attack took place yesterday. But as a community, they are heartbroken, they are shaken, but they are coming together and they will do whatever they can over the coming hours, over the coming days, over the coming weeks, coming months, whatever it may be. They will stick together and provide that network of support for the families who are experiencing the worst thing that any parent, any family member could ever experience.
And Sophie Reaper, the tributes from the parents to their deceased children are incredibly difficult to read, but we pay the respect by doing so. Alice Aguiar, the 9-year-old little Portuguese girl, her parents called her their princess, and the message was, "Fly high, our little star, keep smiling and dancing like you love to do, our princess. Like we said before to you, you're always our princess. And no one would change that. Love from your hero, Daddy, and your mummy." There's also a statement to from BB King's parents to BB. And it says, "No words can describe the devastation that has hit our family as we try to deal with the loss of our little girl, BB." And these messages, for now, Sophie, we're in the grief phase. Sir Keir Starmer was asked there about what he's going to do about this cancer of knife crime that's sweeping the country. And while we're naming the deceased today, Sophie Reaper, we're not naming the individual believed to be responsible for this, the main suspect. But of course, he is 17 and he has the protection of anonymity. But surely soon, Sophie, the pressure will be huge for that piece of information in the public interest going forward.
Well, I think, first of all, Martin, that many people who have been here today to lay tribute would perhaps agree with the Prime Minister that today really does need to be dedicated to those families and that there is time for politics later and, of course, the naming of that suspect. But for today, at least, we do need to just pay our tributes and allow the family time to grieve. However, I think you're also right that over the coming days, there will be one question on people's lips, and that is why. There's been no talk yet about motive. That is obviously still yet to come. People will also, as you say, be asking about the identity of this male, this 17-year-old male who remains in police custody. You rightly point out, of course, because of his age, he's granted anonymity, but there will be lots of questions about whether or not that should be lifted in the public interest. So that is a conversation to be had. But I think for now, the one thing on people's minds is the grief and the heartbreak and the support that this community will be providing to certainly at least the 3 families, but the rest of the families who've also been affected. They, of course, face the weight of hearing how their child is doing. Of course, as far as we know, several of them still in hospital. So a wait for those families to try and find out what is going on exactly with their child, who should have been safe at a Taylor Swift dance class. And instead now they are perhaps in a hospital bed fighting for their lives.
Sophie Reaper, we've been inundated with messages here at GBNews. Just want to read one out to you now. I think it sums up how millions of people are feeling. It's from Scott. He says, I have 2 daughters and I've not slept properly since this has happened. Everything goes through your mind about your own kids. And my heart goes out to those kids and those families that have had their lives changed forever by this attack. And Sophie, I know you've been there and watching parents and children, little kids, laying down bunches of flowers in their community to kids they probably knew. These kind of events, Sophie Reaper, they cast a long shadow over communities, and the people of Southport will take a long time to come to terms with these events, Sophie.
Absolutely, and you know, the area where we are here, just down the road from where the incident took place, this is a residential area. There are houses all around us here. There's a newsagent just over my shoulder. There's pubs, there's cafes. This is the hub of a community, but it's also a relatively small community. This is a seaside town on the Merseyside coastline. This is a place with a promenade, with a beach, with a carousel that people will have really fond memories of visiting, not just from the local area, but from all over the United Kingdom. And I think that this horrific attack will blight a lot of those memories. People will have had plans to come here today on a sunny day in the summer holidays with their children, but now people will question whether or not it's safe to bring their children to Southport, and that is truly a horrific thing for the people of this town.
Sophie Reaper, thank you for that update from Southport. Everyone's trying to make sense of this, and thanks for trying to help us do that. Sophie Reaper live there in Southport. Now, we'll bring you all the latest from Southport throughout the show, and don't go anywhere. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Prince Harry, he's back again. He's reignited the row over Meghan Markle's shattered relationship with Britain. In an ITV interview aired last night, he explained why he still feels it's too dangerous to bring his wife back to the UK.
It's still dangerous, and all it takes is one lone actor, one person who reads this stuff to act on what they have read, and whether it's a knife or acid, whatever it is, and these are things that are a genuine concern for me. It's one of the reasons why I won't bring my wife back to this country.
So will we ever see Meghan Markle back in Britain? I'm delighted to welcome the former royal correspondent at the Daily Express, Richard Palmer.
Well, I think there is certainly a history of far-right extremists targeting Harry and Meghan. You know, there have been a couple of quite prominent cases, I think. But I'm always a bit perplexed by this argument that Harry comes up with, because if you look at, say, homicide rates, comparing the US and the UK, the last figures I saw, you were about four times more likely to be murdered in the US than you are in the UK. And sure, we've got our problems over here, but you know, given that they've got such a high prevalence of people with guns over there, I would have thought the risks were higher over there than over here. And I think we have seen increasingly in the last couple of years that they have become polarising figures in the US as well as in the UK. Perhaps not quite to the same extent, but there does seem to be a bit of a political divide, that if you're a Democrat, you're perhaps more likely to be sympathetic towards Harry and Meghan. If you're a Republican, not so much.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:22. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. An Islamist cleric who directed a banned terrorist organisation from his London home has been jailed for life. And Anjem Choudary had previously been found guilty of 3 terror charges earlier this month. He was convicted after a lengthy undercover investigation by US and Canadian authorities. Charlie Peters reports on the background to the case.
Stand back, sir! Stand back! Stand back! You get hurt!
A shameless and prolific radicaliser, finally silenced. For decades, putting a stop to Anjem Choudary has been a key objective for British counter-terrorism authorities.
I am arresting you under Section 41 of the...
Now convicted of 3 terror charges, Choudary is finally behind bars and unable to warp new minds across the world.
It's not only being a member of a terrorism organisation, guilty. It's not only encouraging a terrorist organisation, guilty, but also it's Section 56 of the Terrorism Act, directing a terrorist organisation, guilty on that count also.
USA, you obey! USA, you obey!
Choudary was found to be the director of terror group Al-Muhajirun after American and Canadian undercover officers recorded him giving lectures to a US-based group called the Islamic Thinkers Society. His so-called personal assistant, a Canadian called Khalid Hussein, told an undercover officer that the Islamic Thinkers Society was the US branch of Al-Muhajirun.
Most people don't know I'm part of Al-Muhajirun or who the Islamic Thinkers Society are anyway, so that's why I don't usually care.
Choudary had radicalised several terrorists, including the ISIS-supporting knife men who launched 2 separate attacks on London Bridge in 2017 and 2019. He also inspired the killers of Fusilier Lee Rigby, a soldier murdered outside his barracks. But Britain's most notorious Islamist now faces many years behind bars. Charlie Peters, GB News.
Well, let's cross slide now to our national reporter, Charlie Peters, who's outside Woolwich Crown Court. Charlie, welcome to the show. A story you've covered for GB News in huge depth and detail. I guess the big question is not only, about the length of time that Anjem Choudary now will be serving at His Majesty's pleasure, but how long it took to jail him and how many millions of pounds of taxpayers' money. A long road to justice, but finally, Charlie Peters, justice has been served.
Well, that's right, Martin, and a senior security official told us after the conviction that this has been an aim and an ambition of British counter-terrorism authorities for many, many years. Because for decades, Anjem Choudary has been a key radicaliser in Britain's Islamist community. Not only has he inspired so many of those attackers that we've seen on British streets, such as the London Bridge attacks and the murder of Fusilier Lee Rigby, just 5 minutes drive away from this Crown Court, but also attackers overseas, terrorists who pledged allegiance to ISIS, as Anjem Choudary himself did in 2014, and then travelled to Iraq and Syria to engage in that rampage across the Middle East. And In his sentencing remarks today, Mr. Justice Wall, when giving down that life sentence, a minimum term of 28 years, he said that Anjem Choudary had caused inspiration to so many of Britain's worst Islamists. He pointed out that one person in particular had gotten in touch with him in May 2020 to say that Anjem Choudary was a key inspirer of his. He also pointed out Siddhartha Dar, who was a key executioner for ISIS, taking over that role after jihadi John Mohammed Imwazi was killed by a US-led drone strike when ISIS was at the height of its rampage. Now, Siddhartha Dar was a member of al-Muhajirun, the proscribed organisation that Anjem Choudary has now been sentenced for directing. And it's that key word, directing a terrorist organisation, which has led to this life sentence with a minimum term of 28 years. It's such a rare charge. It's so uncommon to see someone get that conviction in Britain. It's just the second time it's happened since 2008. And it's on the back of an international, really actually rather quite unprecedented operation conducted by both British, American and Canadian authorities. They were able to get Anjem Choudary because they established that one of his branches in the United States, the Islamic Thinkers Society, was linked directly to al-Muhajirun. They found that Anjem Choudary had given some 30 lectures to the group after his licence conditions expired in 2021. Many of those lectures were attended and recorded by undercover officers from North America, who then sent that information to SO15 at Scotland Yard. And one key person who helped to expose Anjem Chowdary's radicalising effects in the years after his most recent release from prison was Khalid Hussain, also sentenced today to 5 years, considered a personal assistant to Anjem Choudary. He was tasked with creating websites, distributing lecturing material and indeed publications. The defending barrister for Khalid Hussain said he didn't carry out as many of those actions, but he did tell undercover officers that the Islamic Thinkers Society and al-Muhajirun were one and the same. And with that testimony and that information, they were able to swoop on Anjem Choudary and arrest him and charge him for those 3 counts, all 3 of which he was convicted for, and today at his sentencing has gone down for life.
Charlie Peters, excellent summary of a notorious case. Thank you very much for joining us there from Woolwich Crown Court, Charlie Peters. Now, later this evening on GB News, Jacob Rees-Mogg will be sitting down for an exclusive tête-à-tête with Liz Truss. And let's ask Jacob Rees-Mogg now what we'd like to expect from this interview, because he joins me in the studio. Jacob, so you've got a good sit-down with the former PM. What's on the menu?
Absolutely. Well, I'm delighted Liz is coming in to discuss this really important issue of handing over more power to bureaucrats, because what has been revealed by the Bank of England itself was that the rise in interest rates that happened whilst Liz was Prime Minister around the time of the minute budget was the fault of the Bank of England. 2/3 of it relate to something called liquidity after solvency hedging risk. And this is the Bank of England itself, quietly in May, putting its hands up and saying, well, you can't put your hands up and say mea culpa, but that's effectively what it's done. So finding who's responsible and realising, because today is the day the government is introducing a bill to take power from elected politicians, take power from Rachel Reeves and give it to unelected bureaucrats, saying these unelected bureaucrats are marvellous. And now we have the Bank of England admitting that it wasn't so marvellous after all, it was useless.
Now, of course, Liz Truss has been used something as a bogey woman, a bogey man by Rachel Reeves, by the Labour Party, Trussonomics being shorthand for incompetence. And now it seems there's a slight reinvention of this. Is this an attempt by Liz Truss to kind of cleanse her image of that bad PR, do you think?
I think it's a great argument for democracy, because actually Parliament and the British people could vote the Conservatives out because they didn't like the management of the economy. Andrew Bailey can't be voted out by anybody. He's there. He stays. However incompetent the Bank of England is, Andrew Bailey stays, and that undermines democracy. And for some extraordinary reason, Rachel Reeves wants to give the bureaucrats more responsibility and give it up herself. Perhaps she doesn't have confidence in her own judgment to get things right. And after yesterday's performance, that would be quite understandable.
And what time can we expect to tune into this feast?
Well, my programme starts at 8 o'clock, and if people watch from 8 to 9, they will get a good stint of an interview with Liz Truss.
Okay, Jacob Rees-Mogg meets Liz Truss tonight. It's GB News 8 to 9 p.m. Thanks for joining me. Thank you. There's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. Today, the Labour government closed the historic European Scrutiny Committee, a decades-old committee that kept a beady eye on Brussels and how they impacted the UK. Does this mark another totemic step towards Brussels and rejoining the European Union? Well, I'll be joined by the former chairman, Sir Bill Cash, one of the godfathers of Brexit, surely. But first, here's your news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories from the GB newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer has faced hostile shouts from the public as he paid tribute to the victims of the knife attack in Southport. As he laid down a wreath and stood in silence, people shouted, "How many more? And when are you going to do something?" His visit comes as police have now named the 3 girls who died. They are 7-year-old Elsie Stancombe, 9-year-old Alice Aguirre and 6-year-old Bebe King. 5 other children and 2 adults remain in a critical condition in hospital after what was described as a ferocious attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance and yoga workshop. A 17-year-old boy remains in custody on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. Also in the news today, the extremist preacher Anjem Choudary has been handed a life sentence after he was convicted of directing a banned terrorist organisation. The 59-year-old was found guilty of running the terror group in a caretaker role after its founder was jailed in Lebanon in 2014. He'll now spend at least 28 years in prison. And Carol Hunt, who is the wife of BBC commentator John Hunt, died from stab wounds. According to Hertfordshire Police, the investigation into the triple murder found that 2 of their daughters, Hannah and Louise, were killed with a crossbow. Police are still waiting to speak to the suspect, who's in hospital with self-inflicted injuries. And today could be the hottest day of the year so far. Temperatures in some areas expected to soar past 30 degrees. Forecasters expect the heat to break, though, and there will be thunderstorms predicted later on in the week. And it's good news for Team GB in Paris. Nathan Hales has won gold for Great Britain in the men's shooting final, and hopes are still high in the pool tonight for the men's swimming 4x200 relay. That's it from the GB newsroom for now. I'm back in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much, Polly. Now, if you want to get in touch with me, simply go to gbnews.com/yoursay and read out the best of your messages a little later in the show. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello again, welcome to your latest GB News weather update, coming to you from the Met Office. The hot and humid weather across southern parts will continue for a few days still to come, and with that we have the risk of some thunderstorms. Further north it's a fresher feel, but generally we are under the influence of high pressure, which is why there is plenty of fine sunny weather around. A bit of cloud coming and going, but as we go through the end of the day, lots of late sunshine to look forward to for most of us, and for many it is going to be a dry, clear night. In the south, watch out for some isolated thunderstorms that could push their way through as we go through the early hours, and in the south it is going to stay particularly warm overnight, some places holding up in high teens, possibly low 20s. Further north a fresher night, some places dropping to around 4 or 5 Celsius. So as we start first thing tomorrow morning, there is the risk of some showers across southern parts, but these are going to become more frequent as we go through the day. Otherwise it's a generally bright and sunny story. Some cloud across northern parts of England and perhaps Northern Ireland as well, but across much of Scotland it is also going to be largely fine and sunny here. However, over the Northern Isles there may be a bit of showery rain around, and like I said, a chillier start across parts of Scotland compared to other parts of the UK. Through the day then, and as I mentioned, the showers across southern parts are going to become a bit more of a feature. Watch out for some heavy thunderstorms pushing into parts of the south and southeast, and these could lead to some disruption, which is why we have a warning in force. Elsewhere it's likely to stay mostly dry and bright, and again in the south feeling pretty hot, temperatures getting into the low 30s, markedly fresher than this across northern parts, mid to high teens or low 20s for most places here. More showers to come across the southern parts as we go through the evening on Wednesday, and these could still be heavy and could still be thundery, with more thunderstorms likely across much of England and Wales as we go through Thursday as well. Then something a little bit fresher from the west by the weekend. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. Queues on the M60 clockwise in Manchester due to a vehicle fire at Junction 3 Kingsway. The exit slip road has been closed. The M42 southbound in Warwickshire is partially blocked due to an accident and oil spillage between Junction 7 Coles Hill and 6 for Birmingham Airport. In Buckinghamshire, the M1 northbound has been closed for an overturned vehicle. That's between Junction 14 Milton Keynes and 15 for Northampton. There's queues on the M5 northbound in Gloucestershire. There's a lane closed for a multi-vehicle accident at Junction 11, the Golden Valley bypass. Also in Gloucestershire, we're seeing stop-start traffic on the M4 Prince of Wales Bridge in the contraflow system westbound, and there's also queuing traffic to join the M4 Prince of Wales Bridge from the M49 northbound. And that's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:37. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, the government is set to scrap the decades-old European Scrutiny Committee, which allowed members of Parliament to keep tabs on EU laws. Now, this move comes at a time where there is growing speculation that this government is looking to forge a closer relationship with the European Union, and one Brexiteer has called it the end of an era. Well, joining me now in the studio is GB News' political editor Chris Hope. Now, we're about to be joined by Sabeel Cash, who's the chairman of the European Scrutiny Committee. Former chairman. Former, of course, because now it is histoire, as they say in Brussels. For those tuning in who won't be familiar with the European Scrutiny Committee, tell us, when did it start and what was the point of it?
It's very rare we talk about committees as being an important issue for GB News viewers, and why should it be? This is the way, this is the under the bonnet. Yeah. It's how things happen in Parliament. But the European Scrutiny Committee is very important. It's been vetting since, well, as far back as our membership of the EU goes, nearly, our relationship with the European Union. It was meant to set up to try and check that the third or so EU laws that came into force in the UK and give it a degree of a democratic oversight. But in practice, there were so many laws coming from Brussels, they couldn't really do it. It's now been got rid of because the government believes, well, Brexit's done, isn't it? And in recent years, since the Windsor Framework, it was only really looking at Northern Ireland, and can't other committees do that? And Nick Thomas-Symonds, who's basically the Brexit minister, the European Relations minister, he can be quizzed in Parliament and by other committees, so the work's done. But what's fascinating is there is some concern here by Brexiteers, the usual suspects, Mark Francois, Richard Tice, the chairman of the Reform UK Party, Sabeel Cash, the former chairman of that committee for 3 decades. He's concerned because what we know is we are going to get this government doing a closer alliance on so many areas with the European Union to reset that relationship, and they're concerned that who's going to vet that? Who's going to check if we're doing a deal with under 25 migrants from the EU? They can come and go to and fro between UK and EU. That's one idea that may come up to pass. The sellout that might happen on fish quotas. The fish is the dog that hasn't barked yet in the Brexit battles, Martin, as you well know, as often saying on your programme. So let's see where that plays out. But it's not just Brexiteers who are cross, it's Remainers too. Stella Creasy, the Labour MP, I've interviewed her for your programme in the next hour. We'll hear from her how she's concerned about lack of oversight of bringing the UK and EU together even more. I mean,
astonishing. OK, so we'll talk about
what's
that
happening here
in the next hour, but we are now joined by the former chair of the European Security Committee and the king of sovereignty, Sabeel Cash. Sabeel, welcome to the show. So a lot of people will be saying, Sabeel, the final day of Parliament and the Labour government decides to kick the European Scrutiny Committee into touch. And many people might be saying, well, if we're forming closer alliances with Brussels, if Sir Keir Starmer, David Lammy, Nick Thomas-Symonds are flashing their garters to Brussels, surely we need this committee now more than ever.
Well, that is absolutely right. This is not only letting the government off the hook, it is using a one-line whip day where there's been no government statement, on a matter which is fundamental to the whole question of the scrutiny of European legislation, which is still embedded in our law at the moment because it's called EU retained law. It affects immigration law, for example, and it has to be properly investigated. And we've been doing this, and I've been on the committee since 1984, believe it or not. I've also was chairman for 14 years from 2010, as Chris said. And the point about it is this, that this is actually a very, very undemocratic move. In fact, it's almost dictatorial the way they're doing it, without any debate after 7 o'clock this evening. It's literally a piece of hijacking of parliamentary investigative processes. It's a hijacking of the parliamentary select committee system. The standing orders, Standing Order 143 has been there since 1973, as I think Chris said as well. And the bottom line is it's been the engine room of investigation on behalf of the British people, on behalf of British businesses, on behalf of the entirety of the United Kingdom on the European issue. And they are literally not merely turning a page, they're dumping the book, and it's a complete disgrace.
Well, Sir Bill, they're strong words. Chris Hope in the studio here with Martin Daubney. Are you surprised that Stella Creasy, you feel the king of Brexit, she might be the queen of Remain, and then she's backing you and from afar, but in Parliament today, talk with Mark Francois, the chair of the ERG. She's saying it's wrong to ditch this committee.
Well, it's completely undemocratic. I mean, it's no good saying that you want to reset your relations with the European Union, which itself is completely undemocratic, and then do it by a completely undemocratic means. And by undemocratic, I mean literally no means of asking the kind of questions that we've been asking for the last 30, 40, 50 years. But on top of that, more recently, about the whole question of the various agreements that have been entered into with Europe, the Northern Ireland issue, which is absolutely fundamental to the people of Northern Ireland, where they've been subjugated to EU lawmaking, to the whole question of retained law and the small and medium-sized businesses who have a vested interest in getting all that right and getting rid of unnecessary laws. And as I said just now, also immigration laws. In fact, it's a complete and total cop-out. Worse than that, it's done deliberately, by sleight of hand, deceitfully, and furthermore, in order to ensure that people do not know what is going on. This appears to me to be done under the aegis of the Cabinet Office, and they are the ones responsible for the application of remaining EU laws throughout all government departments. We're talking about thousands of laws which are simply not going to be watched and not going to be dealt with properly. That is the measure of it. I have never seen in the whole of my time in Parliament, and that's 40 years, anything so blatantly undemocratic.
Wow, Sir Bill Cash, do you think that this might give us an indication of the direction of travel? We know that David Lammy, Keir Starmer and others would like piecemeal deals on energy, on security, on freedom of movement. We saw with Spanish students this week, all sorts of piecemeal deals. They're precisely the kind of things that need scrutiny. They need the magnifying glass, the BDI of Britain over the business of Brussels. Do you think this is an indication of remove the scrutiny? Might this be a broader march towards rejoining?
Well, all I can say is that the indications are, by the sleight of hand that they're doing this by the, in my opinion, deceitful manner in which it's being conducted, on the last day, one-line whip, no government statement, they're doing this for a reason. I've been in Parliament long enough to know when they're doing something really important and they're trying to hide behind a procedural arrangement which is just simply inadequate for the job. And I very much appreciate Stella Creasy's intervention in this, because there's still time to defer it, to stop it, and the government could withdraw this motion this evening. All it says, and it's terribly important that it is a simple statement because it makes it even worse, that they're going to rescind the standing orders relating to the European Scrutiny Committee. That is effectively like saying we're going to abandon the only committee which, yes?
Bill, just briefly, I know you're on standing orders. I've got to we want to be quick for the break. But you're not in Parliament. But guess who is? Nigel Farage. Is this a test, do you think, for the guy who many think drove the Brexit debate to step up and say this committee must be reinstated?
Well, I would, with great respect, I would dispute the question of whether he drove the Brexit debate. I was doing it back in 1990 without stint right the way through till 2024. But that's another story. The real question is this. Are you going to be able to properly investigate what the government is up to? If they're doing it behind closed doors without proper investigation by an independent select committee, and by the way, the Labour Party indicated, I got a sort of smell of this some time ago because they weren't turning up to my committee because they didn't want to see the kind of investigations that we were carrying out into the question of the extent to which EU law was or was not relevant to the present-day United Kingdom, whether it was really in the interests of small businesses to have the kind of laws that were imposed on us by Brussels, whether it was the right kind of immigration law. So this is a walking disaster, and it is an absolutely unwarranted attack on our democracy. I think it's appalling.
We have to leave it there, Sir Bill Cash, as the curtain falls on the European Security Committee. You have made your point till the bitter end, giving both barrels to Brussels. Thank you very much, Sir Bill Cash. Now, don't go anywhere, because up next, we're discussing the England manager recruitment process and, of course, how apparently it needs to be more diverse. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Football and gambling can go hand in hand and cause long-term problems. New figures show that young adults aged between 16 and 24 who have bet over the last year are more likely to report mental health issues compared to those in older age groups.
And joining us now to discuss this is Matt Burgess, who is a former gambling addict and now helps those to deal with their own gambling issues.
Yeah, I think gambling is one of those things that is so accessible now. You know, everyone's got a kind of mobile phone in their pocket, walk around with a kind of 24-hour casino, if you like. So I think it's really important that people realise that we have to sort of recognise that that is a month of quite condensed gambling, and we don't want people to sort of carry that on into their everyday life, because that's when it can become really risky and you know, it could become addictive.
I had no idea, though, that it was linked to first-time gambling. For the first time, people might be able to pick up and have a go. And then it doesn't end there. It goes on, because by then you've got the bug. Is that how it works?
You've got to remember, for things like the Euros, the World Cup, so you get a lot more people watching football and therefore potentially betting on football.
May I ask you about how severe your own gambling addiction got?
Well, look, I think there was a couple of touch points for me where I realised that things were getting out of hand. There were some times at university where, you know, I kind of thought, you know, I'm definitely doing this a bit too much, but, you know, kind of thought maybe it would move on once I left, but it didn't. It did follow me. And then, you know, I got to points where I was at my worst gambling 16, 17 hours a day. I was spending huge amounts of money. It can spiral out of control very, very quickly, and that was the important thing that we want to highlight is, you know, what can start as fun can become very, very dangerous in a sense.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:50. I'm Martin Daubney, and this is GB News. Now, earlier on, Keir Starmer paid tribute to those lost in the violence at the memorial in Southport today, but he was faced with shouts from the crowd for his government to take action. Take a listen.
Time for change, Starmer. Come on, it's needed. How many more children? Is it mine next? What are you going to stand up for our children? Bye-bye. It's not your fault. Off you go. Make a real change, Prime Minister. Make a real change! Are you going to change the bottle?
There we go. There are a couple of locals there, 2 or 3 shouting, "Go home." You've got your picture. A lot of anger in the community, of course, as well as grieving. People want answers. So Keir Starmer was asked earlier on today, you know, what's going to happen about the rising epidemic of knife crime in Britain. He said today is not about that, but we need to have a solution. But a lot of people in the communities clearly want answers, and you've been sending in hundreds and hundreds of your says on this for the past couple of days now since this story broke yesterday. And David adds this: "I simply cannot come to terms with the fact that I'm living in a country where kids are stabbed to death on the streets. It seems surreal, but it's sadly a fact." And I think a lot of people, David, feel exactly the same as you do. Annie adds this: "We all need to wake up and start clamping down on these people who do these kind of atrocities. We're so used to knife crime in Britain, we're almost immune to it. But when children, when those poor mites are taken, something has radically shifted." Annie, I think you're exactly right. I've been saying throughout the show, many of you have echoed that sentiment. You know, children, why? Why children? People need to know, to try and make some sense of this senseless attack. A holiday camp, millions of parents, myself included, have used these for all of our children. When we have to work through summer holidays, we send them to innocent, beautiful events like this. And today we had to read out the names of the deceased in a way that no parent should ever have to do. We can see there on the left is BB King. She was aged 6. Elsie Stankham in the centre, aged 7. And Alice Argyar on the right there, a 9-year-old. Parents paying tributes to them in ways that no parent should ever have to do. The parents of Alice said, "Fly high, our little star." And they called the attacker, the killer, a despicable human being, echoing really what I think people watching Sir Keir Starmer there want some answers. They want to know what's going to happen next. A 70-year-old is in custody. He hasn't been named, but the deceased have. That's a conversation we intend to carry on GB News. So many of you have been in touch throughout this show. Philip quickly says this: "If you get caught with a knife, then you should get 3 years in prison. End of story. This has to stop." OK, that's all for this hour, but stay with me as I'll keep you updated on that terrible situation, that incident in Southport, which of course has left 3 young girls dead and 5 still fighting for their lives. We'll be live from the community and also the Children's Hospital in the area. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel. Now here's your weather with Alex Burker.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, welcome to your latest GB News weather update, coming to you from the Met Office. The hot and humid weather across southern parts will continue for a few days still to come, and with that we have the risk of some thunderstorms. Further north it's a fresher feel, but generally we are under the influence of high pressure, which is why there is plenty of fine sunny weather around. A bit of cloud coming and going, but as we go through the end of the day, lots of late sunshine to look forward to for most of us, and for many it is going to be a dry, clear night. In the south, watch out for some isolated thunderstorms that could push their way through as we go through the early hours. And in the south, it is going to stay particularly warm overnight. Some places holding up in high teens, possibly low 20s. Further north, a fresher night, some places dropping to around 4 or 5 Celsius. So as we start first thing tomorrow morning, there is the risk of some showers across southern parts, but these are going to become more frequent as we go through the day. Otherwise, it's a generally bright and sunny story. Some cloud across northern parts of England and perhaps Northern Ireland as well, but across much of Scotland, it is also going to be largely fine and sunny here. However, over the Northern Isles, there may be a bit of showery rain around, and like I said, a chillier start across parts of Scotland compared to other parts of the UK. Through the day then, and as I mentioned, the showers across southern parts are going to become a bit more of a feature. Watch out for some heavy thunderstorms pushing into parts of the south and southeast, and these could lead to some disruption, which is why we have a warning in force. Elsewhere, it's likely to stay mostly dry and bright, and again in the south, feeling pretty hot, temperatures getting into the low 30s, markedly fresher than this across northern parts, mid to high teens or low 20s for most places here. More showers to come across the southern parts as we go through the evening on Wednesday, and these could still be heavy and could still be thundery, with more thunderstorms likely across much of England and Wales as we go through Thursday as well. Then something a little bit fresher from the west by the weekend. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. Queues on the M60 clockwise in Manchester due to a vehicle fire at junction 3 Kingsway. The exit slip remains closed nearby. The M42 southbound in Warwickshire has been closed for an accident and an oil spillage between junction 7A, the M6 interchange, and 7 for Coleshill. Queues on the M5 northbound in Gloucestershire due to an earlier accident at junction 11, the Golden Valley bypass. The M1 northbound in Buckinghamshire has been closed for an overturned vehicle between junction 14 Milton Keynes and 15 Northampton. Long delays on the M25 clockwise in Berkshire due to a multi-vehicle accident between junction 15 for the M4 and 16 for the M40. The opposite side is also slow due to onlookers. And there's queues on the M25 anti-clockwise in Kent at junction 1B for Dartford due to a broken down vehicle on the exit slip road.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Celebrate a spectacular summer with your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash in our Great British Giveaway. It's the biggest prize of the year so far, and it's totally tax-free. What would you spend that on? Luxury holidays, a new car, or just put it away for a rainy day? Whatever you do with £30,000 in tax-free cash, make sure you don't miss out on a chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. On today's show, 3 young girls killed in the stabbings in Southport have been named by Merseyside police. as you can see on your screens there from left to right. 6-year-old BB King, 7-year-old Elsie Stankham and 9-year-old Alice Argyll. As tributes pour in, we'll bring you the latest from the news on the ground. And the Prime Minister has been in Southport paying tributes to victims' families and emergency services, but he was heckled by an individual, and we'll bring you footage of that shortly. Hate preacher Anjem Choudary has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 28 years. Choudary once bragged he was the #1 radicaliser in Britain. We'll have the full story on the long road to jailing one of the UK's most notorious and poisonous Islamists. And millions of pensioners are furious today after Rachel Reeves axed the winter fuel allowance for all but the poorest of pensioners. Is it fair to punish those who've paid in for a lifetime, or are tough but necessary choices required? Will pensioners freeze thanks to Rachel Reeves? That's all coming up in your next hour. Thanks for joining me on the show. Always a pleasure to have your company. We've been covering the Southport stabbings now since yesterday, and hundreds of you still coming to terms with that. Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, visited the area and laid a floral tribute with a handwritten note a short while ago, but he was heckled by a couple of residents on the ground. We'll bring you that footage. Is it right for politicians to go so soon? Let me know your thoughts. Post your comments by going to gbnews.com/your say. But first, let's have your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, as you've been hearing, Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has faced hostile shouting from the crowd as he paid tribute to victims of the knife attack in Southport earlier today. As he laid down a wreath and stood in silence, people in the crowd shouted, "How many more?" And they also shouted, "When are you going to do something?" His visit comes as police have now named the 3 little girls who died. They are 7-year-old Elsie Stankham, 9-year-old Alice Argyll, and 6-year-old BB King. 5 other children and 2 adults remain in a critical condition in hospital after what was described as a ferocious attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance and yoga workshop for children. In fact, the pop star herself has paid tribute, saying she's in shock at the news of the loss of life and the horrendous trauma, adding they were just little kids, she said. Well, the Prime Minister thanked emergency crews as he visited the scene today and said action would be taken.
I am very worried about high levels of knife crime, and I'm absolutely determined that my government will get to grips with it. But today is not the time for politics. Today is the time to focus entirely on the families who are going through such pain and grief, and on the wider community, and of course a time to say thank you to those that responded yesterday.
The Prime Minister. Well, in other news today, the Islamist preacher Anjem Choudary has been handed a life sentence after he was convicted of directing a banned terrorist organisation. The 59-year-old appeared stunned as he was told that he'd spent at least 28 years behind bars. He was found guilty of running a terror group after its founder was jailed in Lebanon in 2014. Today's sentencing... Please excuse me. Today's sentencing comes after Choudary managed to evade authorities for decades, despite being jailed in 2016. I do apologise, I was coughing. Right, in other news today, one of the murdered daughters of BBC commentator John Hunt sent a text message asking for help during a crossbow attack, saying she'd been tied up. An inquest heard that Hannah Hunt, who was 28, had managed to dial 999. Emergency responders found her still alive with a crossbow wound, but she later died. Her sister Louise was also killed by the crossbow, while their mother died of stab wounds. Police are still waiting to speak to a suspect who's in hospital with self-inflicted injuries. A serial shoplifter who committed what was described as a near Olympian-scale fraud has been jailed for 10 years. Lorinda Kaur travelled all over the country to carry out what the judge described as a tsunami of dishonesty against top high street retailers. She stole around £500,000 worth of items. Gloucester Crown Court heard the 54-year-old stole from the likes of Boots, Debenhams, John Lewis and TK Maxx more than 1,000 times. And a 73-year-old woman has been arrested after suspected noxious substances were released on a busy shopping street in Bath in Somerset. Shoppers fell ill. 2 people were taken to hospital for breathing difficulties after she approached them with a bag. Witnesses reported seeing people being treated at the scene. One woman had to be hosed down before she was taken onto an ambulance. Avon and Somerset police are investigating and they're asking anyone with any information to come forward. Now, victims of the post office scandal can now apply for compensation of £600,000 or more through a new scheme. Ministers say it aims to right the wrongs of one of Britain's worst miscarriages of justice. Those who've been cleared will start receiving their letters this week, although some may need to submit further evidence. Critics say, though, they're frustrated with the slow pace, saying only 10 letters have been sent out so far. And GB News can reveal that more than 3,000 small boat migrants have crossed the English Channel since Labour came to power. The figure was reached this morning as around 400 more migrants were detected in British waters since yesterday morning. The number of illegal migrants crossing the Channel so far this year is almost 17,000. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. Apologies for my coughing just then. I'm back in half an hour with more news for you.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now, the 3 girls killed in the stabbing in Southport have been named by Merseyside Police in order of the pictures you can see now on your screen on the left there. We have 6-year-old BB King in the middle, 7-year-old Elsie Stankham, and finally on the right, 9-year-old Alice Argier. Well, Keir Starmer paid tribute to those lost in the violence at the memorial today, but was faced with shouts from the crowd for his government to take action.
Time for change, Starmer. Come on, it's needed. How many more children? Is it mine next? You're going to stand up for our children. Bye-bye. It's not your fault. Off you go. Make a real change, Prime Minister. Make a real change! Are you going to change the bottom?
Well, emotions are running high in the area. Now, GB News' North West Wing reporter Sophie Reaper is at the scene. Sophie, thanks for joining us on the show again. So, Sir Keir Starmer there laid a floral tribute. We saw the footage without audio earlier, and when we played it back, emotions running high, heckled there by some people at the floral tribute behind you. But meanwhile, the area is still very much trying to come to terms with its grief as those 3 children, Sophie, have been named, and some incredibly moving tributes from the parents.
Well, those tributes, as you say, Martin, have been coming in now for the past 24 hours or so. Really moving ones, as you say, from the parents of those 3 little girls that I think really will tug at the heartstrings of anyone who hears them. Tributes, of course, also coming from all over the country, from members of the royal family, from members of the government, from sports stars, for example, Tommy Fleetwood, who's from Southport. And in the last 15 minutes or so, we've had tributes paid by a head teacher at the Churchtown Primary School. It's around a 10-minute drive away from here. That's Ginny Payne. Sorry, he paid tribute to the 2 of the girls, stating that 9-year-old Alice Aguiar had been a Year 4 pupil at that school, and 6-year-old BB King was also a former pupil there. He said this of the 2 girls: Alice was the happiest of souls, a true ray of sunshine sunshine. She was known and loved by everyone in our school community of 700 children, a testament to her unique ability to connect with the others. He also said of BB, she was a joyful girl whose kindness radiated through the entire Churchtown community. During her time at the school, BB's considerate nature and her love of learning shone through in everything that she did. They also added, our immediate thoughts and deepest sympathies are with the families and friends of both Alice and BB during this impossibly difficult time. Now, that's just one tribute of hundreds, perhaps even thousands, that have been paid today to those three girls, as well as the others who were injured in the attack, and of course their families who will be dealing with the grief and tragedy of the outfalling of this attack. Now, here on Hart Street in Southport today, we've been seeing people in the last hour or so coming in droves. This morning when we arrived, there were a smattering of flowers laid on the floor, but now you can see over my shoulder there are hundreds of floral tributes that have been laid here. There are also cards. There's now a balloon which says forever in our hearts. There are candles that have been laid. And I must also add, in the last hour, a member of staff from the local Sainsbury's has been down to this part of Hart Street, bringing with him buckets filled with water and additional flowers, so that members of the community who bring flowers along can place them within the buckets to make sure that those tributes last for as long as possible. So an incredible gesture there from that local supermarket. But that's just one gesture. There have been hundreds, if not thousands, as I say, coming in throughout the course of today, as this community truly does come together to try and support those families who are now going through one of the worst things I think anyone could possibly ever imagine going through.
And Sophie Reaper, Taylor Swift has also issued a statement because, of course, the girls were dancing at a yoga and Taylor Swift holiday camp. She said, the horror of yesterday's attack in Southport is washing over me continuously, and I'm just completely in shock. And a small ray of sunlight in this. Sophie Reaper, a GoFundMe page called Swifties for Southport, has now raised over £100,000 in donations. Money is... what's money at a time like this? But it nevertheless does give you some crumb of comfort that out there people are being warm and generous and caring and supportive at a time where, Sophie Reaper, many people are asking big questions about the state of Britain, the state of the mind, the state of the nation that could even allow something like this to happen in the first place.
Well, certainly money can never bring back those three little girls who've lost their lives as a result of this attack, but it does show support for the families, and, you know, perhaps that money could be used for funeral costs, for anything that the family may need over the coming days and weeks. So, as you say, it is a small shred of hope that they can take away from that. I think, you know, Taylor Swift was here in Merseyside just over a month ago. And you imagine those Taylor Swift songs, many of which are so upbeat and happy, those little girls at that class yesterday. You can picture it in your mind that they were there dancing. I think also that it was advertised that the class, they would be making friendship bracelets, that activity that has become synonymous with Taylor Swift as a symbol of joy and happiness that fans exchange at her concerts, to say that they've been there, they've seen Taylor Swift, and those little girls, they will have been there. You can imagine them dancing away carefree, knowing that they had their entire summer holiday ahead of them. For three of them now, that isn't the case, of course, heartbreakingly so, but also those others that remain in critical conditions, we're waiting to hear on those as well. And of course, even those who weren't physically harmed in this attack, they will of course be traumatised by this for some time to come now. No one could have ever imagined that this kind of thing would happen here in Southport. This is a quiet residential area. This was a summer camp that children should have been safe at, that parents should have felt safe dropping their children off at, and believing that they should have been able to come and collect them at the end of it, and that just sadly wasn't the case, and so true heartbreak here in Southport.
I think that's why so many people have resonated with this so strongly, Sophie, because That could have been my daughter, that could have been anyone's daughter. It's such a normal, joyous, wonderful thing to put your child into one of these holiday camps and then it ends this way. I've got a message here from somebody who lives a couple of streets away from where you are now. I'd like to read that out. It's from Chrissy. Chrissy says, I'm feeling absolutely devastated. I cannot believe this has happened and only a couple of roads from our home. We moved to the area from Essex more than 20 years ago and we always felt safe in the knowledge that this sort of event couldn't possibly happen here. Now, one day on, and the sense of loss and questioning why someone would even want to take innocent lives like this is simply crushing. Chrissy, I think you speak on behalf of the nation. And Sophie Reaper, thank you very much for continuing to bring us fantastic coverage there from Southport. Thank you. Now, moving on, an Islamist cleric who directed a banned terrorist organisation from his London home, he's been jailed for life. Anjem Choudary had previously been found guilty of 3 terror charges earlier this month. He was convicted after a lengthy undercover investigation by both US and Canadian authorities. Charlie Peters reports on the background to this case.
Stand back, sir! Stand back! Stand back! You get hurt!
A shameless and prolific radicaliser, finally silenced. For decades, putting a stop to Anjem Choudary has been a key objective for British counter-terrorism authorities.
I am arresting you under Section 41 of the...
Now convicted of 3 terror charges, Choudary is finally behind bars and unable to warp new minds across the world.
It's not only being a member of a terrorism organisation, guilty. It's not only encouraging a terrorist organisation, guilty. But also it's Section 56 of the Terrorism Act, directing a terrorist organisation, guilty on that count also.
USA, you obey! USA, you obey!
Choudary was found to be the director of terror group Al-Muhajirun after American and Canadian undercover officers recorded him giving lectures to a US-based group called the Islamic Thinkers Society. His so-called personal assistant, a Canadian called Khalid Hussein, told an undercover officer that the Islamic Thinkers Society was the US branch of Al-Muhajirun.
Most people don't know I'm part of Al-Muhajirun or who the Islamic Thinkers Society are anyway, so that's why I don't usually care.
Choudary had radicalised several terrorists, including the ISIS-supporting knife men who launched 2 separate attacks on London Bridge in 2017 and 2019. He also inspired the killers of Fusilier Lee Rigby, a soldier murdered outside his barracks. But Britain's most notorious Islamist now faces many years behind bars. Charlie Peters, GB News.
Well, let's cross live now to our national reporter, Charlie Peters, who's outside Woolwich Crown Court. Charlie, welcome to the show. So Britain's most poisonous hate preacher finally behind bars, 28 years at His Majesty's pleasure. But Charlie, another story is the huge amount of time and money, taxpayers' money, it took to bring Anjem Choudary to justice. Tell us more.
Yes, Martin. Well, today in the dock, Anjem Choudary was a silenced figure. Glancing over to where the media were gathered in the court here in Woolwich, he made a few looks towards us. But as he stood up to be addressed by Mr. Justice Wall, the judge here, he looked visibly stunned, rocking slightly on his feet as the life sentence was handed down, a minimum term of 28 years to finally bring to justice one of Britain's most notorious and dangerous Islamists, who has for decades radicalised so many men who've gone on to commit appalling acts both at home and overseas. We've listed just a few of those attacks in that video report, but there are several others that he was involved in and those he was linked to from his proscribed terrorist organisation Al-Muhajirun, because many of those members went to Iraq and Syria to join ISIS. A couple of them were mentioned in those sentencing remarks. One man in May 2020 told Anjem Choudary that he considered him an inspiration. Another, Siddhartha Dar, had left the UK to go to Iraq and Syria and be the ISIS executioner, replacing Mohammed Emwazi, Jihadi John, who was killed by a US-led drone strike. The judge here, Mr. Justice Wall, also noted that because of Anjem Choudary's extreme danger, he was also extremely intelligent and persuasive, and he had groomed so many young men into becoming Islamists. But now, with this life sentence and this charge, he is unable to preach to new minds and warp new young men around the world. And it's part of that international investigation that led to this success. The charges, in particular on directing a terrorist organisation, were achieved by links with both American and Canadian authorities. They infiltrated a group called the Islamic Thinkers Society, which prosecutors convinced the jury of was a link between al-Muhajirun. In fact, the groups were one and the same, that the Islamic Thinkers Society was the North American branch of al-Muhajirun. And they achieved that by having Khalid Hussein, his co-defendant, speaking to undercover officers who he thought were would-be terrorists and fellow Islamists, saying that the two groups were linked, admitting that he was in al-Muhajirun. This evidence was key to demonstrating that when Anjem Choudary was delivering lectures on encrypted online platforms, he was addressing terrorists and a terrorist organisation. But now, with this conviction and this sentencing, they've got a radicaliser, a leader, not just a foot soldier, and Britain is safer for it.
Charlie Peters from outside Woolwich Crown Court, excellent reporting. You know, Anjem Choudary once called himself Britain's #1 radicaliser. Let's hope that that stops and he can't continue to do that from inside prison. Charlie Peters, thanks for joining us. Coming up, Rachel Reeves faces backlash following yesterday's announcements, which could see around 10 million pensioners lose their winter fuel allowance. Will pensioners freeze under Rachel Reeves? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes, she could have said stump. You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Prince Harry also revealed that he wouldn't bring his wife Meghan Markle back to the UK over safety concerns.
Let's talk to royal correspondent Michael Cole.
Good morning, Stephen. Good morning, Ellie. I mean, they live in California. I'm not sure what the murder rate is there, but that's a more dangerous place than Britain's at any time of the day. And of course, he compromised his own safety when he said in his book, Spare, his autobiography, which was Ghost Britain, that he'd personally killed 25 Taliban when he was serving with the British Army in Afghanistan. Well, that painted a target for life on the back of himself and his family, which was a very unwise thing for him to do. The other thing which struck me, it was that he invoked the name the late Queen, saying that he'd had several conversations with his grandmother, and she'd been very, very supportive in his battle. He sees himself, and it's the word he's used, as a dragon slayer against the popular press, the tabloid press, and he's continuing with that. Of course, his brother, Prince William, has settled, but also in the programme was Hugh Grant. Now, Hugh Grant also has settled, as indeed did I. When I received an apology from News Group. I believe in a free and unfettered press. Newspapers are having a bad time at the moment, losing circulation, losing advertising. Young people don't read newspapers. And so I felt that the right thing to do was to settle. I didn't want to take punitive action against newspapers.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 5:24. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, around 10 million pensioners are set to lose their winter fuel allowance. The measure was announced as Chancellor Rachel Reeves accused the Conservatives of leaving a £22 billion black hole in public finances. Now, her opposite number, Jeremy Hunt, wants to stop so-called trash talking about the UK economy, blaming Labour for not balancing their books. What does this mean for you, for the pensioners out there? Well, let's cross now to the pensions expert, Tom McPhail. Tom, welcome to the show. So the dust is settling on a monumental speech. Millions of pensioners looking to be significantly worse off. In fact, a report out today by Hargraves Lounsdone and the Resolution Foundation say it could be as much as £1,260 a year when you add the dreaded fiscal drag and the winter fuel payments. A lot of people out there, Tom, will be thinking, this isn't fair, and how do I keep my money safe?
Well, indeed, and the tone of Rachel Reeves' speech yesterday was fairly doom-laden. I mean, it was a political speech. She was preparing the ground for further cuts come the autumn, but I think it was noteworthy too that on the one hand, she was committing to an above-inflation pay settlement for public sector workers, for the workers, who we repeatedly heard pre-election were the favoured cohorts of the population. And then in another breath, she announced cuts to pension allowances for retired people. And we know Labour have an intention to target people's wealth. So this feels like the thin end of the wedge, that this is just the start of more to come. And we probably will hear more in the same vein come the autumn. I mean, you asked the question, how can people protect their financial position? Well, it's going to be challenging, particularly for pensioners who rely on things like the state pension and the various other allowances, the free prescriptions, the TV licence and so on. There's very little they can do to protect those allowances from the state. But I think people will also be worried about their private savings and their private pensions and what might be coming down the tracks there as well.
Yeah, and Tom McPhail, all eyes on that autumn budget. And a tweet by Rachel Reeves turned up this morning, and she says this time again, this post she refers to, it's the Labour Party who will stand up for pensioners, defending the triple lock and winter fuel payments. How things change when politicians get in power. Tom McPhail, please come back when we know more details on that autumn statement. Thanks for joining us. Now, the government is set to scrap the decades-old European Scrutiny Committee, which allowed MPs to keep tabs on European Union laws. Now, this move comes at a time where there is growing speculation that the government is looking to forge a closer relationship with the European Union, and one Brexiteer has called it the end of an era. Well, joining me now in the studio is GB News' political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, welcome back. So, in the last hour, we had Sir Bill Cash, the former chairman of the committee, on the show, giving both barrels to Brexit. But astonishingly, it's not just the big beast of Brexit who is shedding a tear over this. Tell us more.
Giving both barrels not to Brexit, but to the government for acting this committee, which is getting rid of a scrutiny mechanism to probe that EU-UK relationship. But not just Sir Bill Cash, you know, the godfather of Brexit, but Stella Creasy, a Remain Queen, who is also unhappy. Here's what she had to say.
You might find this odd, but I actually agree with the concerns that Mark Francois and indeed Richard Tice were raising in the chamber, that it's right that Parliament has a role in the scrutiny of what happens with our relationship with Europe. I completely disagree with their perspective on what is going on, because I think what the government is doing is very positive. But I think it's understandable that people are asking, well, where's this conversation going to happen? And I'd like to be part of that conversation. I think there's a really strong story to tell about why we need to act. I look at all the paperwork that's stopping food coming across the border. I look at the problems going to come with people travelling for their holidays. I can see the opportunities that come from a trade deal.
So it's boosting the power of Parliament to vet our relationship with Europe for good or ill, if it's closer or not closer.
Well, I also think it's about what our constituents are going to ask us. I get a lot of constituents coming to me completely bewildered by all the paperwork that hard Brexit has created for them, wanting to know what we're going to do about it. And obviously having dedicated committees where those issues can be looked at, let's be honest, some of it can be quite technical and a little bit dull. Those are really important. And actually, I think ministers do respect and understand that, because, of course, there's a whole load of expertise that goes behind it. So I think, obviously, this decision has only been announced in the last 24 hours. There are lots of questions arising from it. We can disagree on the outcomes, but we can all agree that it's an important matter to resolve.
You have it bookmarked this, Martin. Stella Creasy agrees with Richard Tice, the Reform UK chairman, because they're concerned about overreach by the executive. What's happened here? There's 121 Tory MPs, 70 or so Lib Dem MPs. You've got a Labour Party sitting on a huge majority, and the concern's going to be that by exercising power this way, they're drunk on power and they're keen to get rid of any opposition at all, and that will come back to bite them, I reckon.
Maybe we need a new de facto chairman. Maybe that person should be Nigel Farage. Now he's a member of Parliament. Somebody's got to keep an eye on this Brussels movement. Otherwise, if we're not careful, the cat flat's been left unscrewed.
Well, he's your old colleague from the Brexit Party in the European Parliament. Let's see if Nigel Farage does step up, because people are watching him going to America, meeting his friend Donald Trump after the shooting. Is he here in Parliament, and will he be there ensuring, or at least protesting about this removal of this attempt to keep a check on weakening Brexit? The test for him, I think.
Well, the European Scrutiny Committee for decades did that job of being the overlord, looking over all of this, now sadly consigned to history. Chris Hope, thank you very much. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock as 6 Conservative candidates throw their hat in the ring for the Tory leadership. I'll be joined by a shadow minister for her take. But first, it's your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour: the Prime Minister has faced hostile shouts from the public as he paid tribute to the victims of the knife attack in Southport. He bent down to lay a wreath and stood in silence, but people from the crowd shouted, "How many more? And when are you going to do something?" His visit comes as police have now named the 3 girls who died. They are 7-year-old Elsie Stankham, 9-year-old Alice Aguirre and 6-year-old Bebe King. 5 other children and 2 adults remain in a critical condition in hospital after what was described as a ferocious attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance and yoga workshop for children. A 17-year-old male remains in custody on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. In other news today, the Islamist preacher Anjem Choudary will spend at least 28 years in prison after being found guilty of directing terrorism. The 57-year-old was also convicted of encouraging support for the banned group ALM through online meetings. He was arrested following a joint investigation by police in the UK, US and Canada, and looked stunned and exasperated as his sentence was handed down. And an inquest has heard the wife of racing commentator John Hunt died from stab wounds. The investigation into the triple murder found that 2 of their daughters, Hannah and Louise, suffered fatal crossbow injuries. Kyle Clifford was arrested on suspicion of their murder, but is yet to be questioned by police because he's in hospital with self-inflicted injuries. And forecasters warned it could have been the hottest day of the year so far. Some areas reaching 32 degrees Celsius. We're still waiting to confirm whether or not that record has been hit, though it has been around 30 degrees for most of the day outside our studios here at GB News in Paddington in London, but you better make the most of it. Thunderstorms are predicted to break the hot spell later in the week. And we're hearing Microsoft has been hit with another global outage, impacting email accounts and 365 functions. The tech giant says it's investigating a network infrastructure issue affecting access to its services, including Minecraft as well. It comes just 2 weeks after a separate major IT outage disrupted global systems, including transportation and healthcare, due to a flawed software update from the firm CrowdStrike. Let's bring you some developing news we're getting right now from Ireland. Emergency services, we're told, are responding to a helicopter crash. Police say there have been a number of casualties in the crash after the chopper hit a building near Killucan in County Westmeath. It's reported that medical teams are finding it difficult to get to the crash site as farm lanes are causing a backup. The Irish Air Investigation Unit is understood to be looking at what happened. Those are the latest news headlines for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst. I'm back in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report. Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Polly. Now, hundreds of you have been in touch throughout the show so far. If you want to add your voice to that, then simply go to gbnews.com/your say, and I'll make sure I read out the best of your messages a little later in the show. Do you think it was suitable of Sir Keir Starmer to go to Southport? He got heckled there. A lot of you have been in touch about that. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello again, welcome to your latest GB News weather update, coming to you from the Met Office. The hot and humid weather across southern parts will continue for a few days still to come, and with that we have the risk of some thunderstorms. Further north it's a fresher feel, but generally we are under the influence of high pressure, which is why there is plenty of fine sunny weather around. A bit of cloud coming and going, but as we go through the end of the day, lots of late sunshine to look forward to for most of us, and for many it is going to be a dry, clear night. In the south, watch out for some isolated thunderstorms that could push their way through as we go through the early hours, and in the south it is going to stay particularly warm overnight, some places holding up in high teens, possibly low 20s. Further north, a fresher night, some places dropping to around 4 or 5 Celsius. So as we start first thing tomorrow morning, there is the risk of some showers across southern parts, but these are going to become more frequent as we go through the day. Otherwise it's a generally bright and sunny story. Some cloud across northern parts of England and perhaps Northern Ireland as well, but across much of Scotland it is also going to be largely fine and sunny here. However, over the Northern Isles there may be a bit of showery rain around, and like I said, a chillier start across parts of Scotland compared to other parts of the UK. Through the day then, and as I mentioned, the showers across southern parts are going to become a bit more of a feature. Watch out for some heavy thunderstorms pushing into parts of the south and southeast, and these could lead to some disruption, which is why we have a warning in force. Elsewhere it's likely to stay mostly dry and bright, and again in the south feeling pretty hot, temperatures getting into the low 30s, markedly fresher than this across northern parts, mid to high teens or low 20s for most places here. More showers to come across the southern parts as we go through the evening on Wednesday, and these could still be heavy and could still be thundery, with more thunderstorms likely across much of England and Wales as we go through Thursday as well. Then something a little bit fresher from the west by the weekend. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Afternoon, I'm Gary King in Kent. The coastbound M2, there's a lane closed on the exit slip road at junction 3 at Chatham following a breakdown causing a few delays. Berkshire, the eastbound M4, 2 lanes closed and delays after an accident between junction 6 at Slough and junction 5 at Langley. In Somerset, the southbound M5, there's a lane closed due to a car transporter having a tyre change southbound from junction 21 at Weston-super-Mare towards 22 at Burnham-on-Sea. Buckinghamshire northbound M1 is currently closed. Delays building there following an overturned vehicle between junction 14 at Milton Keynes and 15 at Northampton. And in Warwickshire, the southbound M42 looking busy after an earlier accident and fuel spillage around junction 7A at the M6. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 5:38. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, the full list of Conservative leadership candidates has been released following Monday afternoon's deadline. 6 MPs will compete in the 3-month contest to succeed Rishi Sunak. And join me now in the studio to discuss this is the Shadow Energy Minister, Joy Morrissey. Joy, welcome to the studio. So we know who the runners and the riders are. Let's start with the bookies' favourite, Kemi Badenoch. She said her pitch: the Tories have been increasingly incoherent and increasingly liberal and have been tolerating nasty identity politics. She's the favourite, 2-1. That sounds like quite a right-wing pitch.
Well, I think she's standing up for British values. I think she's standing up for what we heard on the doorstep. I should say I'm a whip, so I'm not allowed to back any one candidate, but I can talk about the runners and riders. Sure. I think she's a very strong choice. She's she's listened to what the British people want, which is to stand up for the things they believe in and to be confident and to hold Labour to account. I think she could do that very well. Priti Patel, of course, is another big name, similar kind of pitch, and she's been very open. It isn't our heroic members who failed, but politicians' distraction from public services. She talks a lot about the infighting in the party and how that has to go to one side. Is that likely? A leadership challenge isn't something, it's not Queensberry rules, is it? Well, I think Pretty's an example of someone who's risen above all the internal politics. She backed all the prime ministers. She fought for the Rwanda bill. She's someone who's very strong in the grassroots and can take the fight to Labour. And she is a good example of someone who can unify the party.
And meanwhile, then we have James Cleverly. Only I can unite the party. Perhaps, yes, more good luck with that. Tom Tugendhat, thought of as a centrist, but a curveball came in about he'd be prepared to leave the ECHR. Is that true? Or is this another way, do you think, of fending off a problem you've got in the shape of Nigel Farage?
I think Tom is someone who is very relatable and very authentic, as is James. I actually supported James a long time ago when he first stood for leader. They're both wonderful, really authentic politicians who care about this country and want to stand up for British values.
A lot of people write into GB News, and you probably look at the comments yourself on the Telegraph, on the Mail, on the Express, and there is a feeling of betrayal. There's a sense of huge loss. Lifetime Conservative voters who changed ship. They went to Reform UK. A lot of them stayed at home. A lot, of course, in the Shires went to the yellow corner, went to Liberal Democrats, and a few to Labour, of course. It's a party with a personality disorder in many ways, because a lot of voters don't know what the Conservative Party stands for now. On the one hand, you're trying to woo consistently the Remainer Shires, the Lib Dems. On the other hand, you're trying to go for the Brexity red meat Conservatives that defected to Reform. Can the Conservative Party be all things to all voters, or is it time for a bigger look in the mirror, an existential decision about what the party stands for? The future direction needs to be decided.
Absolutely. Well, it does. I mean, we lost, and it's time for some not navel-gazing, but moving forward. And what I heard on the doorstep again and again in the election was people want us to be tough on immigration. They want us to stand up for British values. They feel like the silent majority has been silenced, and they want to have low tax, and they want to have the nanny state out of their business. Now, they're going to get all those things with the Labour government.
But they had all of those things for 14 years, or definitely drifted towards all of that under the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party consistently promised to be tough on all of those things: low tax, low immigration, low state, but that didn't happen.
Well, I think we put through legislation that really would deliver, and what was interesting is now the Labour government voted against all the legislation we put in place to stop immigration. So I'm very curious to see what they're going to do now they're in government to reduce immigration levels. And also, I was very surprised to hear that the sort of tax rate on pensioners and what that's going to do for a lot of my constituents, and what Labour's going to do to raise tax in the future. And I think whoever takes over the leadership needs to value those values and make sure that we hold Labour to account.
What do you make of the war of words that broke out yesterday in Chamber? You know, it's like, it's your fault, £22 billion. Jeremy Hunt saying, no, it's your fault. Are people getting a bit tired of this blame game? What people really want is grown-up politics and solutions, not this muckraking.
Well, I think with GB Energy costing £9 billion, with the new public sector pay rises costing another £9 billion, we're seeing where maybe this black hole that she's talking about has come from. You have to make choices when you're in government. They're in government now, and if they're going to pay public sector workers but take away fuel allowance for pensioners, there's going to be a cost to that, to the public. And if you're going to do £9 billion for GB Energy, which is Ed Miliband's new project for... We're not sure what it does, but, you know, the Labour Party is excited about it. That comes with a cost, and there are consequences. You're in government now. It's our job to scrutinise you. That's how it works. So,
can I quickly ask you, November the 3rd is the date. That's one hell of a pregnancy. You know, it's a long time to get there. Is it cynically and deliberately time to be 2 days before the presidential election in America so no one's going to even notice?
I feel like probably, but, you know, I can't possibly comment, but it feels like it probably is a little bit.
Thank you, Morrissey. Joy Morrissey, thanks for joining me here in the studio. Superb stuff. Thank you. Now, coming up, Team GB adds a third gold medal to its tally. I'll tell you what shortly. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel. We've got a nice handshake, yeah.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
One local cricket team was made up entirely of one family. The Jollens.
The Newmarket midweek seconds played Thurlow and Old Mill Greenian seconds, captained by, here we go, James Jolland. He played alongside family members Henry, Freddie, George, Jack, Archie, Ryan, Brandon and Daniel. Even if slightly controversial, one of the umpires was a Jolland to Stephen the umpire.
Yes, well, the Jolland family mostly live in Wickhambrook in Suffolk and have played for 4 years for Dullingham Village team before it merged with Newmarket. So that's the entire backstory. We're delighted to be joined now by Captain James Jolland and teammate and brother Nick Jolland. Really good to see you both this morning. This is incredible. How did you get the entire family involved in cricket?
Well, we started the club about 3 years ago, and it was more friends and family. But then it had this opportunity of this week to get everyone involved, because everyone was back and they all played cricket, various levels, and the youngest being 12, George. And we're all available, so we thought 1 week we'd do the whole team.
You booted the friends out for 1 week only?
Yeah, they were very good about it. They come and watched. They supported us.
How did the other team feel about having an umpire with related ties?
Well, the captain of the Thurlow is one of our friends. We do know him, so he was fine with it, and there was no controversial decisions at all.
I think it's a fantastic strategy.
No, yeah.
You could plant somebody.
That's the way
in a position of authority. It's a great idea.
Oh, look, here's the scorecard we can see on the screen with all of your names on there. Some fantastic English names on there. How does it get between the family members? Is it very, very competitive between you all?
As you get older, you work on that, don't you? And you keep that competitiveness out of it. And it's really to play with your sons. It's a great thing to do.
Yeah, it's a lovely
We've
thing
all
to
got
do.
sons in it. That's why we do it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, it's 5:47. Now, in other news, Great Britain has added another gold medal to our collection at the Paris Olympics. Nathan Hale secured the Olympic title in the men's shooting trap final, and on his debut, no less. The 28-year-old has also set a new Olympic record, scoring a staggering 48 out of 50 available targets in the final, hitting the bullseye. And here's somebody else who does, and that's Chris Scudder. Chris, a fantastic achievement, and the gold tally rises, and more to look forward to. Tell us more.
Yeah, it's 3 golds now, 5 silver, 3 bronze, 11 medals, moving up the medals table. Keeping an eye on those countries above. It's a bit, medal table at the moment, it's a bit sort of uneven because some countries have their preferable stuff first, like Korea with the archery. So we'll go up, don't worry about that. But yeah, Nathan Hale's man of the hour, brilliant stuff. He's 28 from Chatham in Kent. And honestly, it was really compelling viewing this afternoon. It's basically clay pigeon shooting where the clay is fired at 60 miles an hour and he has to knock it out the sky. He did it 48 times out of 50. And to give it some context, the old record was 43 out of 50. Absolutely obliterated it. And the 6 in the final field, and they eventually lose one by one until there's the 2 in the last pair together. It was a Chinese athlete and Nathan Hales, and he blew him away, really did. And first time we've won the trap since 1968, and the first shooting gold as well since Peter Wilson in 2012. So brilliant stuff, yeah.
And what else? So Andy Murray, talking about a young athlete starting his career here. Andy Murray, though, could be on his way out. What's happening?
Yeah, well, he's got his doubles tonight with Dan Evans after the heroics when they saved 5 consecutive match points. He's playing a Belgian pair. They haven't started yet against Sander Gilles and Joran Vliegen. They've got to wait till Carlos Alcaraz and Rafa Nadal finish their match. They're on court at the moment, so that'll be coming early this evening. But Martin, we talk about golds, and that's what everyone wants really. There's going to be one tonight in the pool, almost certainly. I think that's going to be in the 4x2 2 freestyle. There was a gold medal that was won in Tokyo, and the British team is so good. Matt Richards, who got the silver, almost won the main 200 freestyle last night, lost it by a fingertip, and he's going again tonight. Duncan Scott, Tom Dean, who was the Olympic champion in the 2 and the relay, James Guy, Jack McMillan, Kieran Bird. They've got to pick a team of 4 from 6, but they're so good. That's about 9:15 tonight, and I'll be very surprised if there's not a gold medal coming in the pool this evening. Some disappointments today. The Olympic champion in the freestyle BMX biking, one of the more unusual sports, if you like, Charlotte Worthington, she got knocked out, sadly, but her teammate Kieran Riley's through. And it was a brilliant performance in the men's hockey, where the Brits came back from 2-0 down to hold the world #1 and better top seeds, the Netherlands. And I think there's going to be certainly a medal of some colour for Britain in the hockey. But all looking good. A lot of strong stuff to come. We're climbing up that medal table. Looking at France above us at the moment, but don't worry about that. They'll be reeling them in soon.
Thank you, Chris, and we'll see you again tomorrow for more of the same. An update from Paris. Thank you. We're now seeing live shots in Southport, where a vigil will take place for the victims of the horrific knife attack. You can see people there, locals, amassing in the town's market square to pay tribute. So let's cross live now to GBNews reporter Will Hollis, who is in Southport. Will, emotional scenes there, the town coming together to pay tribute at a vigil. I believe that kicks off around about 6 o'clock in about 9 minutes' time. Tell us more.
Yes, there are these rare occasions when you see a community come together in shock, in grief, to mourn, in this case, reeling from the events of yesterday, something that happened little more than 24 hours ago. We're right in the heart of Southport, a famous seaside town that attracts visitors from around the region as well as the country. But here, people have been brought into this focal point because of tragedy. We now know the names of 3 young girls that were killed in that horrific knife attack yesterday at a summer dance club, listening to the music of Taylor Swift. Alice Aguirre, age 9, Elsie Stancombe, age 7, B.B. King, age 6. And we know that in the hospitals close by, as well as across the Manchester and Liverpool area, 5 children still remain in a critical condition, as well as 2 adults who bravely rushed to help them. Here in the centre of Southport, thousands of people are gathering to lay flowers, to lay wreaths, to write notes, and to light candles in one of the hardest things that a community has to do. We know that in a few short moments, probably about 15 minutes, the local town's mayor will be speaking, as well as the mayor of Liverpool, people from the church, as well as people from the community. This is an event that has been organised by the community, supported as well by the local council. We know now that a 17-year-old male remains in custody, being questioned by Merseyside police. Police are still trying to understand what happened and why it happened, establishing a motive that would mean that somebody would do something in a community that is often quiet.
I think, Will Hollis, that's been the overriding emotion we've seen throughout today, as people from the community have been touchingly laying flowers, balloons, children's toys, parents with children as young, if not younger, than those who tragically lost their lives. And in these moments, this is when communities come together and show that there is hope amongst this darkness. So many questions lie ahead. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, visited the area today, and he faced some heckling. A lot of you have been getting in touch saying, was it the right thing to do for a Prime Minister to go? He was paying respects with a floral tribute and a handwritten letter, but faced some resistance from the locals. This vigil of locals coming together, the mayor of the area and the mayor of Liverpool, trying to make sense of the tragic events of yesterday that sadly took the lives of 3 children. That's all from me today. But we have to watch the live vigil from Southport in just a few moments after your weather on Jubes & Co.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, welcome to your latest GB News weather update, coming to you from the Met Office. The hot and humid weather across southern parts will continue for a few days still to come, and with that we have the risk of some thunderstorms. Further north it's a fresher feel, but generally we are under the influence of high pressure, which is why there is plenty of fine sunny weather around. A bit of cloud coming and going, but as we go through the end of the day, lots of late sunshine to look forward to for most of us, and for many it is going to be a dry, clear night. In the south, watch out for some isolated thunderstorms that could push their way through as we go through the early hours, and in the south it is going to stay particularly warm overnight, some places holding up in high teens, possibly low 20s. Further north, a fresher night, some places dropping to around 4 or 5 Celsius. So as we start first thing tomorrow morning, there is the risk of some showers across southern parts, but these are going to become more frequent as we go through the day. Otherwise it's a generally bright and sunny story. Some cloud across northern parts of England and perhaps Northern Ireland as well, but across much of Scotland it is also going to be largely fine and sunny here. However, over the Northern Isles there may be a bit of showery rain around, and like I said, a chillier start across parts of Scotland compared to other parts of the UK. Through the day then, and as I mentioned, the showers across southern parts are going to become a bit more of a feature. Watch out for some heavy thunderstorms pushing into parts of the south and southeast, and these could lead to some disruption, which is why we have a warning in force. Elsewhere it's likely to stay mostly dry and bright, and again in the south feeling pretty hot, temperatures getting into the low 30s, markedly fresher than this across northern parts, mid to high teens or low 20s for most places here. More showers to come across the southern parts as we go through the evening on Wednesday, and these could still be heavy and could still be thundery, with more thunderstorms likely across much of England and Wales as we go through Thursday as well. Then something a little bit fresher from the west by the weekend. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel